Alright boys, it's finally here. Part 2 of the Amaris Civil War. Had to find the time to set aside for this one because this video is a bit of a doozy. Of course, before we get into the movie length reaction here, make sure to go support the OG video. Link to that is at the very top of the description, as always.
Attention, Rebirth Scout. I am the Khan of Smoke Jacket. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed.
Sure, buddy.
Okay, class. Sit down and shut up. We're going to get through this lesson before we evacuate. You did pay me after all, and this professor needs those student vouchers for booze money. Also, regrettably, it looks like the clanners figured out where I live, and those jokes didn't go over so well. Smoked Jaguar, indeed.
How dare you mock my noble lineage? This is a notice of battle.
Excuse me, fucko. Firstly, interrupting a class is rude. Secondly, this lecture is about Star League, so it's like Baskin-Robbins' 51 flavors of dishonorable. Don't you want these guys to know their history of the noble Star League, of the glories of General Kerensky himself?
I am sorry. Can I sit in? I will still read.
Oh, he's gonna join us. That's right. I mean, we're learning all about Kerensky and how he went out into the, well, outside the inner sphere, essentially, and created the clans, right? Because I believe last we left off, the Black Watch had slam dunked on Amaris. He didn't die, but he's probably gonna be running for the rest of his life. Considering how badass all of them are, I would always live looking over my own shoulder.
Leave you later.
Yeah, sure, I guess. Just don't go through the wall and take a seat in the back.
Ah, noble founder, this is a good lecture.
In part 1 of this series, we introduced the brave, the bold, the crazy, and the just plain unfortunate souls who took part in this series of events. In the beginning, we explored the formation of Star League, a grand, unifying government built around a centralized, efficient bureaucracy encompassing the great 5 houses of the Inner Sphere. We highlighted key events contributing to its growth, rise, peak, and then gradual collapse from increasingly difficult political turmoil. In part 1, we studied the formation of the SLDF, the single largest military instrument ever created, and its utilization to brutally bring the periphery in line at gunpoint. Because the Inner Sphere likes a free real estate deal above everything else. We also learned that Stefan Amaris, through his scheming, and scheming alone, managed to destabilize an increasingly shaky government by removing the head of state. Quite literally in this case. To accomplish...
As we talked about in part 1, so many kingdoms fall because of this very reason. An incompetent leader and a charismatic worm tongue. Thinking back on it, I can't even get mad at the kid. He was set up for failure from the very beginning. And this whole system that they had, with the inner sphere being controlled this way, meant that if you ever had a leader who wasn't incredibly competent, then you were bound to fail, and things would collapse.
This, he gambled everything he had. He'd started a war. He put people into the right place at the right time to take control. Together, we discovered that he was a man driven to avenge personal slights against his family.
It was very well planned out until the Black Watch survived the initial nuke. Then things kind of went bad.
His nation and his honor by House Cameron, and by extension, Star League. He'd acted out of lust for power, vengeance, and above all, personal vendetta. He alone, through his actions, toppled the old regime through a masterfully orchestrated coup, his forces being in perfect position to seize the hegemony in a single act of magnificent barbarism and cruelty. And it is of note that he nearly failed because of the bagpipe, whiskey, and madness-fueled royal unit that was the glorious Black Watch. Yeah, the mad stand of the Black Watch is a tale still told with reverence between Mechwarriors for generations now. And it's very important to understand that in dying the way they did, they sent a message. This wasn't going to be as easy as Amaris had thought. In a magnificent moment of glorious defiance, in a blaze of crazy, mad bastardism, Amaris was reminded of how fragile a thing like victory truly is. And this brush with near death would never leave him. Amaris would, in fact, take increasingly paranoid steps to ensure his reign was secure. He was, in my opinion, haunted by what might have been, and what may yet be. The Black Watch and their death were just a moment in history, but for Amaris they were a fearful, constant reminder of how easy it could have gone the other way.
As I said before, if that was me, I would never be able to get a good night's rest ever again. I'd be paranoid about my security. The moment the coup happened, these guys were ready for it, and they almost got him. And you gotta remember, like, it's so severely damaging to his psyche because of how many years he had spent meticulously laying out this perfect plan and executing it beautifully. And even then, on a surprise response to this emergency that was going on, they almost beat his plan.
But we will get to that soon enough. In the last episode, we also had our introductory study in the profile and career of General Kerensky. We saw how he tried to do his best to keep things as they were, in a delicate political balance and in certainly uncertain times. Kerensky was a powerful general, to be certain, but
Kerensky was really good at the military side of things, but you can't be perfect. I recall those several comments talking about how he wasn't exactly the greatest role model or like guardian type figure, which honestly he really shouldn't have been given that position, but I guess who else are you gonna trust?
He was tasked with raising a First Lord and in a very uncertain political arena. Star League was in decline, and this heir presumptively could have reversed the course of history. He did his best as an advisor and protector, but ultimately he fell back on what he knew best, his duty and oaths to Star League above all, and that would ultimately doom his efforts. But we'll get to that. And lastly, in part 1, we set the ground for the throwdown of throwdowns, the Guerra on Terra, a war so big it would shake the foundation of the inner sphere and lead to centuries of violence, political turmoil, adventurism, and
free
chaos.
urban mech parking.
As you may
Didn't even
recall,
notice that.
we left this lesson on a wonderful cliffhanger. Amaris had contacted Kerensky and offered everything. A place in the new regime, ultimate power as a general, if not warlord, and potentially a very real place as inheritor of Star League itself. But, tempted with everything, the keys to power and the right to use it as he saw fit, Kerensky remembered above all his duty to his oaths, Star League above all. Kerensky had said no. And it wouldn't be the last time. So here we are, at the Amaris Civil War. Warning, if you haven't seen part 1, I'd recommend it. Anyways, introduction over, recap over. Here we go. If the theme to part 1 was the death of Richard Cameron and the after effects of the initial coup, the theme to part 2 is the death of Star League. Buckle up, lads,
Bro, Karinsky's gonna come back and put the throwdown. The absolute smackdown with an RKO out of nowhere. If only things had turned out differently, maybe we would be in a much better position than we currently are in the BattleTech universe.
It's going to be a long one. The Amaris Civil War would rage from 2766 to 2780 in a 14-year campaign that would decide the ultimate fate of Star League. It would cost in the end humanity generations of lives in indiscriminate slaughter. Each and every weapon ever crafted by humanity would be used in the greatest contest of wills, arms, and armies ever seen. This war was the end result of, and made worse by, a seemingly endless arms race that until now lacked an outlet for its destructive energies. This was a war unlike any other in the history of man up to this point, so comparisons are hard to make directly. For the first time, humanity was at war with itself across the entire span of the inner sphere. From the Rimworld's republic to the Terran hegemony, this world would touch hundreds of worlds, leaving many blasted, irradiated, and broken wastelands in its wake. This was a war that seldom offered any quarter, and civilian populations died in terror as increasingly destructive weapons were utilized by desperate combatants. This was a war where slaughter was the norm, and strategic weapons were just another tool. At least in the eyes of Amaris. The Amaris Civil War started with surgical precision as a calculated coup, and when Amaris turned from coup phase to an actual war footing, both his Rimworld's Republic and the SLDF stood atop tremendous, though wholly different resources to commit to their campaign. The grand prize in all of this was control of the Terran hegemony, the potential rule of Star League itself, and by extension the future of the inner sphere. For the sake of historical note, I will have to try to explain something here. While Karinsky was busy in the periphery, Amaris had struck and struck well. The head of House Cameron was vaporized, the inheritors of that name dead or gone, and it is keen to note that consolidating an empire isn't merely a change of flags. Further, when he came under attack by mad bastards who loved kilts, bagpipes, and murder, though not necessarily in that order, he had been reminded on the pain of hubris. Again, for the record, I say this event scarred Amaris. For Amaris was reminded that he was mortal, and that it took the use of tactical nukes and many of his best men to stop people so angry they refused to die.
Yep.
It is again my opinion of record that the Black Watch haunted Amaris in ways he'd never considered possible. It's not surprising that he'd be unable to forget the Black Watch. After all, their resistance was quickly becoming a legend. And when a unit's favorite grenade is satchel charges, it seems to leave an impression at the very least. But in the aftermath of nearly dying to the batshit madness of the Black Watch, that brush with the possibility of a gruesome end and failure had, again, in my opinion, a profound effect on Amaris.
I assume that there wasn't any lore implications to this, or any sort of mention towards his feelings about it. It was simply an event that had happened. But if we're considering an organic person, character, who had experienced all that, then yes, I agree. He would be haunted by this memory of the Black Watch. And even if that isn't true, I want to believe that it is.
My evidence is the historical note that he became increasingly paranoid after this event, and began to clamp down on the population to ensure, at any cost, he would be safe.
Okay, there is
secured, Amaris did not just sit idle. Again, as building an empire isn't something you can handle with a pen. No, empires are forged by the sword. To the point, in the first week of January, Amaris imported tens of thousands of hand-picked, utterly loyal men from the Rimworld's Republic that would serve as the foundation for the Hegemony security forces. Their aim? To make problems go away. By go away, I mean root out dissidents, naysayers, or anyone with any strong objection to Amaris's rule and make them disappear by any means possible. These agents forming the Hegemony security forces would, through their calculated, state-sponsored cruelty, give Amaris the power he'd aspired for. Their excesses in cruel methodology would haunt the worlds they touched for generations. Publicly, Amaris insisted on at least pretending things were normal. Normal for Amaris's taste, anyhow.
Yeah. Don't think any of this is normal for the regular citizens, who had mostly been living a peaceful life up until now. Like, I don't think there was a situation where there were battles being fought within the Inner Sphere itself. Amongst the different houses, perhaps, but I feel like mostly the Inner Sphere was being deployed to the periphery. So all these regular-ass people just trying to live their lives now have to go through all this because of some incompetent leadership and guy who's incredibly ambitious and also incredibly competent.
The barest sliver of legitimacy as a ruling power, he called for immediate votes for a new Director General of the Hegemony, and further the appearance of legitimacy by directly appointing a Hegemony noble to serve in the interim until a vote could be had. The vote for the new Hegemony Director General was organized swiftly through the widespread placement of the new Hegemony security forces and thorough integration of Rimworld's Republic units throughout the occupied territory prior to the coup. The vote was held despite widespread destruction, panic, and near-total communications breakdown during the coup and limited repair afterwards. Further, there was the consideration that Hegemony analysts projected at best a 10% turnout for the vote, considering the widespread issues with organizing a vote in a chaotic post-coup state. But that wouldn't do for Amaris. He had a new empire to run after all. Amaris claimed an 85% turnout, with 70% overwhelmingly voting for Amaris. This was a fairly amazing feat considering many of these worlds were cut off from the HPG network and over half the planetary governors were dead or missing. Regardless of the legality, Amaris had his title. Those who did report favorable voting turnout did so under extreme duress. But that hardly mattered, as Amaris was, at least provisionally, now the legal Director General of the Terran Hegemony. This was abhorrent and horrific to the ruling classes, but it would set the acceptable precedent for generations afterward in practical regime change throughout the Inner Sphere. Once installed as the new Director General of the
It makes sense. Like, this wouldn't be the only coup that ever happened, right? The reason why it's so big, and why we're mentioning it though, is because it's sort of what set everything else into motion. This essentially made BattleTech into what it is now. But yeah, considering how all the borders within the Inner Sphere change all the time, I would imagine they would base some of their doings upon this initial event.
Terran Hegemony, he promised a grand new era of peace and prosperity, that House Cameron's foolishness and mistakes were now at an end, and that the future would be one of unity under his guiding hand.
Yeah, how do you get the people on your side? Gotta use that propaganda.
This was not to be just a new hegemony, but a new Star League, reborn as an empire under the guiding vision and limitless power of a new emperor, bold enough to seize it. The HPG networks not critically damaged were slowly reactivated, with the first circuit of SL Comnet firing up to deliver the announcement of Amaris's new empire. Kerensky was the first to issue a reality check. Kerensky's response was legend. No. The major houses offered something more ambivalent, though. Silence. The great houses did not lend him legitimacy, but they also did not mourn the fall of House Cameron.
can't blame them. Cameron was not making a good name for himself. Like, if I recall correctly, even before Amaris did his whole coup thing, we were already pissing off all the houses with some really stupid ideas. Hey, so you guys don't mind if I take away all the power that you have in order to bolster my own forces? That way you guys can't defend yourselves from me, right? You guys are okay with that, yeah? And obviously no, but yeah, Cameron was being manipulated, and he also wasn't very smart. If I was in the position of one of the house leaders, I think I'd do the same. Just lay low, see how this blows over. You don't know what's gonna happen. Picking a side right now would be kind of foolish.
In a way, their silence answered many questions. First, it demonstrated their feelings about House Cameron. Richard Cameron suddenly disappearing after making some exceptionally poor decisions was seen as a favor, if not boon, to the great houses. There was to be no more meddlesome madness from a fading line of bad rulers. No more directives, laws, or missives from a child playing God. But their silence also spoke volumes of the current assessment of the power balance. They were afraid, after all, and had every right to be. Amaris had done the impossible. He had orchestrated the defeat of the hegemony by stabbing it in the heart. He'd taken the head off the beast, so to speak. He'd overcome defenses designed to be impregnable, and he'd even given the SLDF a black eye. He had done the impossible and done so in such a way as they wondered what else might he have up his sleeve. They considered, was Amaris waiting to topple them as well and challenging them to make the first move? In addition, you have to consider that individually the House militaries were somewhat limited by the preceding decades of Star League buildup. They'd been given every excuse to put trust in the SLDF and had done so as arms buildups were exceptionally, if not prohibitively, expensive. Also, SLDF Charter had regulated the size of their militaries, and as such, they knew if they defied and then openly challenged Amaris, they might find themselves overthrown in the name of whatever the hell Amaris was smoking.
Was this also a part of Amaris's plan? It's actually insane how well this went. If you take out the Black Watch from the equation, even if the houses were to, for whatever reason, band together in order to reinstate the SLDF by combining all of their military forces, it probably wouldn't amount to enough to set up a proper war against them, because of the limitations that the SLDF had put on them previously. So yeah, at this point, it's essentially a checkmate, and the ball's on your side of the court, unless if Kerensky stirs things up, but I think he's gonna take some time off and rebuild his forces first. That would probably be the best way to go about it.
But on the other hand, they also knew that if Kerensky returned and managed to restore the status quo, any assistance or compliance given to Amaris would become, perhaps, problematic. As such, the House Lords said nothing, and chose no sides, at least officially. However, it is interesting to note that the great houses immediately asked General Kerensky's intentions, and for him to report his movements. The House Lords' response is reasonable. They had their own issues on their own home soil. You see, the Star League bureaucracy wasn't doing so well, and that somewhat made things difficult from an organizational standpoint. SLDF bureaucrats didn't know what to do. Follow instructions issued from the hegemony from a usurper. Follow instructions issued from a general far, far away. Follow instructions of the great house institutions they supported and paralleled. This wasn't just the case of paperwork and who stamps what. This was a financial network and banking system that held the wealth of billions upon billions of taxpayers. This was the civil infrastructure and logistics system of the greatest nation ever formed. Bureaucrats across the inner sphere struggled with what to do. They were, after all, in a crisis of leadership. With
This is one of the aspects that I really enjoy about BattleTech. is that we actually get into the finer details of what it means to go to war. We're not simply taking a look at the cool mechs fighting each other. Of course, that is a pretty big part of it, but I find that most stories with war in them, or some sort of conflict, tend to ignore the people, the economy, the logistics, and that hasn't been the case with BattleTech. Every single decision and every single movement of your army that is being made has to take into account these factors.
Communications difficulties, lack of orders, or in some cases countermanding orders, plus the House Lords offering integration opportunities with their existing systems, many bureaucrats just went home or found new jobs with their house governments, and when their checks started to bounce, they decided to walk away. Some civil servants desperately tried to maintain what services they could, believing in Starleague as it fell, believing it may return someday. Most, however, turned their assets and holdings over to the great houses in their jurisdictional territory, choosing to side with a stable government over one ruled by a potential psychopath.
I don't blame them, but considering how BattleTech lore is currently going, I don't think an SLDF is in sight anytime soon. Do we have anybody from any of the houses that seems to be so incredibly powerful that they might be able to just take it all for themselves? I know that some are much greater in military power, but we've also reached a state of deadlock where if you invade somebody else, then another house might invade you. Plus the potential of completely wiping out anything that anybody has ever again. So we just end up dooming humanity if we go to a full-scale war like that again.
Throughout Starleague, the overnight conquest of the hegemony destabilized the Starleague dollar, causing widespread economic chaos.
Yep.
The outages of the HPG network further caused rampant speculation and market woes. Without regulatory control or banking afforded by the Starleague, financial institutions now either being abandoned or co-opted by the great houses, people pulled their money out of once safe Starleague investments. Throughout the inner sphere, investors transferred enormous wealth from what was once safe Starleague monetary investments and bonds into house bills as soon as they were able. Folks saw the writing on the wall and voted with their wallet. To the common citizen, Starleague as an investment, either financially or the future, was doomed. And as General Kerensky carefully deliberated his actions, as he knew full well that rash action in this time would doom the cause of Starleague, Amaris continued to reshape the hegemony into his new empire. For to occupy a nation, as stated before, is one thing, but to reshape it, that takes time. As stated earlier, Amaris had founded the Hegemony Security Forces, and those began rapidly forming huge contingents on every occupied Hegemony world, recruiting most heavily from those least loyal to Starleague, least loyal to the Camerons, and most swayed by money or the promise of power. Amaris also formed the Director General's Office of Policy and Doctrine. This was more or less an exported extension of Amaris's practice in his homeland, a political officer's corps to police wrongthink. And boys and girls, Amaris hated wrongthink. Amaris punished wrongthink. And wrongthink was defined as anything Amaris didn't like. To eliminate any anti-Amaris sentiment, OPD officers were placed in every government office and building across the hegemony to ensure total compliance with every new governmental policy and memorandum.
Taking away a human being's freedom is such an inherent fear for everybody. That's probably why it has become a common trope in so many pieces of media, especially those that deal with the future in a more apocalyptic setting. Or honestly, it doesn't even have to be apocalyptic. Because like, I don't think Helldivers is apocalyptic, but it's got all that written over it. Or like Starship Troopers as well. Fallout New Vegas has a ton of similar themes, and well, now BattleTech. Although, I suppose the reason why we fear it so much is because it has happened before, and will likely happen again.
OPD officers bugged public and private places, eavesdropped on all conversation, monitored all communications traffic,
So sad.
and watched with practiced eyes all actions taken by any citizen of this new empire. And under their gaze, suspicion alone was enough to warrant severe reprisals.
A classic, just like in 40k. Guilty until proven innocent. But it's best to just kill you anyways, even if you're innocent. Because chaos works in mysterious ways, you never know!
The Terran hegemony was now in essence little more than a garrisoned, heavily occupied police state.
Yep.
Internal security policing actions resulted in the formation of enormous gulags, over which 200,000 were sent the first year alone. Few, if any, ever returned. Amaris's goons promised great monetary rewards for reporting traitors, disloyal citizens, outspoken critics, or even the barest suggestion of subversive activity.
Snitches get rewards. Literally Amaris.
Soon, friends and family turned on each other out of desperation or fear.
Oh, no.
The state was all, and Comrade Amaris was the state. By April that year, Amaris had formally begun the recruiting and training of some 30 divisions to replace and reinforce his holdings on the hegemony. They were raised from hegemony worlds, but trained, led, and equipped by RimWorld's Republic forces. Every defensible position on any garrisoned world was turned into a massively reinforced fortress. The streets of the hegemony were now policed by men rewarded for brutality and wiping out even the barest notion of dissent with overwhelming violence.
I just feel so incredibly sad for all the people who had to live through this time. Granted, most of them didn't have to live through it very long, one way or another. But just imagining myself being born into this sort of era, under this regime, I think I probably wish to either rebel, or that I wasn't born at all.
Reports of death squads roaming the street became commonplace. Outspoken individuals, former SLDF officers, their families and friends all disappeared or fled. Those who criticized the regime or its actions were swiftly erased from history. Amaris's regime had no place for fence-sitters. You were either pro-Amaris, or you were fucking dead.
Why is it always, when it comes to politics, that you can't have a neutral position? Is it so bad to see the good and the bad for each side? We don't even have to talk about BattleTech for this. Just like modern day civilization and society. People on the internet. Whenever you have a middling opinion about something, there's gotta be people that are pissed off from both sides. I think that sort of critical thinking should be encouraged, but you also can't really control the actions of others, so what are you gonna do? What this is setting up for, though, is a massive smackdown from Kerensky. The moment that there is a light of hope for a rebellion against this brutality, I think he's gonna get all the people on his side. I would join him. The drop of a heartbeat, I would join him. Because living and trying to conform to this, that sucks. That's not living.
Mercenaries loyal to Amaris were used to conduct the least tasteful work, or at least the work that required a certain essence of plausible deniability. For unsavory purposes, Amaris had retained the infamous mercenary unit, the Greenhaven Gestapo. They were at first just a group of highly morally flexible advisors to Stefan Amaris,
Morally
but
flexible.
he found their contributions in taking the hegemony worth rewarding. Ruthless and efficient, the mercs were exactly what Amaris prized. Later on, their war crimes would be a permanent scar on his regime. As stated, the Greenhaven Gestapo was instrumental in the seizing of main Terran government buildings, in displays of savagery and brutality much in line with Amaris's designs. However, Once they were turned on the civilian population, things quickly degenerated into looting, pillaging, and murder in the name of state security. As they were mercenaries at heart, the Greenhaven Gestapo decided to make some quick coin and sacked Rome.
I'm sure even worse happened. And now I will bring up something, once again, that I brought up in part 1 of the Amaris Civil War, but do none of these people read history books? Has there ever been a time where ruling by fear has worked out for somebody? If you make an enemy of everybody around you, and you're not some charismatic leader who can make the people underneath you love you, or believe in everything that you say, then I don't think this is gonna work for very long. Ultimately, it's the people that decide your fate. It's the people that give you the power that you currently hold. If the people aren't on your side, then you have nothing.
Why? Well, it was the mercenary tradition long-standing at that time through centuries back to sack Rome, as Rome was historically always a good choice for quick cash and good ransom. Being largely undefended with little in the way of organized resistance, Rome quickly bent to their occupation. And as history will indicate, they ran amok in the Papal States. For example, one of their commanders had a portrait of himself spray-painted over the Sistine Chapel. When 750 Catholic monks had a hunger strike in the square, a member of the Greenhaven Gestapo blocked them in with his rampage and stomped them flat. And then they went further with their fun. They then arrested the Pope after he refused to point out priests who were disloyal to the regime. 3 years later, they'd murder the Pope after he refused to cooperate. Through his mercs, Amaris didn't just target Catholics either. Amaris was, after all, a true atheist and decided the universe was a neater place without the complexities of an organized religion. His death squads oppressed all regardless of their faith, for he had room for only one form of worship, to the person and glory of Stephen Amaris.
Oh my god. Freaking Amaris. What is wrong with you, bro? I take back the competent leader part that I talked about earlier. This is not how you go about it. You're taking everything from these people. They are not going to take this lying down. It might take them some time to gather their forces, but they will come for you. And the Black Watch is still out there. Just saying. I tend to avoid conversations when it comes to religion and things like that. But I think here, it might be fine. After all, it's sort of baked into the story that we're talking about right now. But personally, as a Buddhist, which is sort of an atheist religion, I guess, I think as an atheist, you wouldn't want to destroy people from other religions, especially if you wanted to rule over them, because that religion is an anchor point for their mental health. I suppose you could see that as a potential way of rebelling against you, but I don't think that different belief is entirely going to be the cause for them rebelling against you. You would think that more people would actually respect your leadership if you respected their own preferences. However, now that I think back on it, there have been multiple cases where this has been the case, and removing people's religion also is used as a means to essentially gut their culture and reform them into whatever you need. Basically make them into Play-Doh. Makes it easier to brainwash people to your propaganda. But then again, for all you history buffs out there, I have to ask, has that ever worked? I know there are several examples of tyrannical leaders doing this, but has it ever worked?
All others were impediments to his operations. Such impediments were removed with ruthless precision. Soon enough, the everyday citizen of his new empire would find themselves under his whip. Amaris made hugely unrealistic demands from the population at large, but all the more from its workers and factories. Workers were brutally beaten, tortured, and executed for failing to meet insane projected production schedules. Meeting quotas was rewarded with additional quotas. People worked their fingers to the bone to earn the reward of bony fingers. Food and medicine were in short supply, a supply regulated by priority toward people Amaris saw as doing what he wanted. The economy switched to a war footing as Amaris entrenched every world he could, building strategic weapons stockpiles for what he saw as the inevitable showdown. Factories were increasingly turned over to weapons production, ammunitions production. Fuel and tires and uniforms were churned out in massive stockpiles and put away for the coming storm.
I forgot to factor in the fact that he is becoming extremely paranoid about the upcoming conflict, and is very likely why he's going through all these methods in order to take as much control as possible and get as much military force as possible, because this man is deeply afraid, and I wonder why. But yeah, this is just, it's not smart, but he's also not in his right mind.
Consumer goods disappeared from stores nearly entirely, as supplies other than war material began to run low. While worlds were given increasingly ridiculous production quotas and exhaustive production schedules, this was complicated by Amaris continuing to raise armies and garrisons, further depleting the worlds of their effective labor forces. And some complained, stating they couldn't both raise armies and equip them. However, complaints were not acceptable under Amaris's regime. If a world complained or even reported food shortages, food was withheld and the entire world was punished. Troubles mounting, Amaris soon began to see problems everywhere. People refusing to believe in him were punished. Worlds he suspected of treason, he punished. Populations that pushed back were punished. The civilian situation increasingly worsened throughout the hegemony as Amaris squeezed the people for all they had. Food and medical supplies were soon in critical shortage, and he withheld them routinely as yet another measure of punishment. People begging to be fed was just another punishable crime in Amaris's new empire. And after seeing the excesses of Amaris's consolidation of power, of the SLDF being deleted from the hegemony with nuclear, biological, and chemical attacks, of the bureaucrats being shot at their desks for refusing to move a stamp, most citizens realized they had to deal with the realities of the present rather than hope for a brighter tomorrow. After all, they'd seen those who resisted in the initial stages of the takeover being turned into radioactive sinkholes. Hope was, essentially, dead. Slowly but surely, the hegemony descended into a siege mentality, building stockpiles and defenses for the coming long war. Through excesses in human suffering, Amaris made significant headway. He reinforced the hegemony in ways the Star League never considered. He knew the shortcomings of Star League's extensively planned defenses, for he'd found weaknesses in and exploited them after all.
Yeah, that makes sense. He talked a lot to Cameron after all, and Cameron literally told him everything, so you can't use any of the old battle strategies that you had before. Karinsky's gonna have to come up with something original. Hopefully he's gonna have enough time to cook. And yeah, like, giving the civilian population no hope, no sight of any sort of rebellion, making them solely focus on surviving the day-to-day, does seem to be the right way to go about it if he wants to rule by fear. But we still haven't caught Karinsky, and I genuinely believe that even if Karinsky wasn't out there, there would be someone, somewhere out there in the galaxy, who would rise up and take up that role. It is really hard to keep people oppressed forever. Downright impossible to do in the first place, I would say.
Through hard work and exceptional human suffering, he turned peaceful yet defensible worlds into hellish death traps. He reinforced every fortification for any conceivable attack, siege, or protracted battle. He ordered his men to drill exhaustively and to constantly train to avoid embarrassment like the 4th Amaris Dragoons fighting mad bastards wearing kilts. He ordered the construction of bunkers,
it wasn't their fault,
hardened defensive points, and extensive space-borne defenses as well. Please try to understand that Amaris, while having extensively prepared, knew the full might of the SLDF Navy, which was enormous and quite inclined to fuck things up if given the opportunity. The war in the stars went well for Amaris because his men got lucky, and after several bloody fights seized the space defense network. But he knew the bulk of the Navy would return with Kerensky, and so men were trained extensively on the operation of established space defense systems. These space defense systems would figure heavily into Amaris's plans, as his Navy suffered heavily in pushing the SLDF out of the hegemony in the initial stages of the coup. The Star League Navy had accounted for itself well, and there were holdouts still hiding in the hegemony, doing much to harass and spy on Amaris's doings from secret locations. I may, if you all are interested, do a whole talk on the grand old Star League Navy, but I'll spare the details for now, as that would be yet another hour. Let me know. Might be fun anyways. Worlds under Amaris's thumb were patrolled for the first sight of the SLDF. Drone ships constantly hunted the hegemony for even the smallest observation craft, making intelligence gathering for the SLDF a precarious venture, if not a lethal operation. As now established, each house, now concerned with many possible futures and not wanting to back a loser, decided to mostly stay out of it. As such, the war broke down to the principal antagonists. Side A was the forces of Stefan Amaris, leading the occupied Terran hegemony systems, including their now extensively reinforced defenses growing stronger by the day. Further, he was aided by powerful defense industries in the hegemony long established as the primary arms producers of the Inner Sphere. He held these in addition to the Ascendant Rimworld's Republic, which he had secretly prepared its industry, economy, and military specifically for this conflict. I won't be vague here. Let's put this into numbers. Amaris's own forces included at least 100 regiments of battle mechs alone. To keep in mind, a single regiment of battle mechs is 150 to 180 fucking mechs plus support divisions. Amaris also had the entire naval and aerospace assets of a great house many times over, through his house's careful preparation for the coup, minus the early lumps handed to him by the SLDF Navy. He maintained a strong grip on the Rimworld's Republic, in addition to all the hidden SLDF weapon stockpiles in the occupied hegemony. Historical notes show us that for decades, the SLDF had warned that the Rimworld's Republic was building an army many times over what they were allowed by Star League treaty. Warnings that were now far too late. For the record here, there is some dispute over the total naval assets of Amaris, but it is said that he possessed over 270 warships prior to the coup, many of which were as good, if not better, than the SLDF fleet. House armies had 50 to 70 warships at most, and many of those were not line ships.
Amaris's pimp barge, definitely a warship. I think he even had a deal with Cameron. I was basically the only person allowed to stockpile all this weaponry, because, you know, he's a trusted advisor. I felt like it was one of the more obvious moves that unfortunately Cameron did not see coming.
Most house navies had a small core flotilla of capital vessels, and then the remainder was split between patrol and support vessels for anti-piracy duties. And as established, the Rimworld's Republic had patiently built a war machine for generations just for this single moment. Every industry and government plan had been laid down on the principal need to feed a war-fighting capacity to challenge the SLDF openly if need be. Hell, Amaris had even built enormous battleships, which were better protected than SLDF's biggest warships. They called them the Amaris class, by the way, because Amaris is, well,
he's creative with names.
Make me get the bib picture out again. The guy had issues that were only solved by, well, enormous battleships named after himself, because that's the kind of guy he was, and
wasn't compensating for anything.
Okay, we'll do this again. Look, he's wearing a bib. This guy has some problems, and who the fuck is holding his arm? Is that like the general manager for the Golden Corral of Space Kansas?
I would assume so.
It's not inspiring. If you take someone's head off and brilliantly overcome the greatest defenses yet designed, wear something nice like his smoking jacket. Editor, can we do that? And a top hat. Class him up a bit. I know people are gonna go nuts over someone so Machiavellian looking just like a goof, but just class him up a bit, like 2 notches. Good.
Nice.
Better.
Damn.
Anyways, while Amaris had lost significant numbers of his
Massive props to all the editors out there. I used to do editing work. You do a whole lot for very little.
navy to the initial space battles in the hegemony, he was now building new hulls on Star League yards and blueprints. Further, he was rapidly training his men thoroughly on the operation of the now captured SDS networks. Soon all that power would be firmly in his hands. Needless to say, Amaris was sitting on an enormous stockpile of world's weapons and personnel to throw into the fray. He was growing stronger by the day. He awaited Kerensky's next action, trying to bait him into attacking the hegemony directly after being bogged down. So let's look at the opposite side of this equation.
Finally, some
Side
hope.
B of this conflict
Right?
was the SLDF, a huge multinational force which had now been bogged down in years of counterinsurgency fighting in the periphery. Worn down by years of hard campaigning spread across the entire periphery, bloodied and bitter at putting down a needless insurrection, and now devastated at the loss of their friends and comrades in the hegemony. The SLDF was certainly on the back foot from the beginning, not to mention now being completely cut off from any reinforcement or supply. Losses in the periphery uprising and rebellion, plus hegemony losses in the coup, put total SLDF manpower by 1,255 regiments.
Yeah, I didn't even consider that. We don't have any factories anymore, right? Because I would assume if there was a factory available, it would have to be making parts for Amaris, and if not, then they would all die, and the factory owner would mysteriously disappear. So are we just like salvaging everything that we can from every single battlefield that we find and trying to survive off of that? That doesn't sound like such a great situation. How are we going to turn this around? Are we going to find some supporters in the periphery somewhere? Or do we have to build everything up from scratch and restart all over again?
I'll say that again as a chill runs down your veteran friend's spine. 1,255 regiments. Gone. 30% of the SLDF's effective military strength from pre-war levels was now totally gone. History has shown us that armies rarely bounce back from losses such as these, if at all. The survivors were now hollow men and women haunted by a horrific, senseless war in the periphery, and now many of them were without a home, or a government, or a cause. The hegemony was occupied, and the status of the First Lord at this point was an unknown. Some would point out that the SLDF had the numerical advantage here, including far superior numbers and naval assets. It is worth noting that the SLDF was split into regional commands. In addition, Kerensky was unable to draw upon the additional resources from the great houses he expected, or even in the occupied hegemony. An army this large would soon need massive resupply before any campaign of conquest, and they had no infrastructure other than what they could seize and capture.
Yeah, if we go in right now, it's basically gonna be game over. There's no way we can win. Even if you might have the numbers advantage, but you're running out of supplies.
There was no infrastructure to replace their extensive losses, no recruitment centers, no resupply and logistics train available. The great houses were not going to help them. They were on their own. Having an army all the larger than your opponent does no good when supplies run low or out. The SLDF was cut off and in a desperate state the day House Cameron fell. They had lost over 30% of their strength mauled into combat ineffectiveness in the periphery war. They had lost 1 million men before the coup had even started. Further, with the collapse of the Star League bureaucracy came the near total loss of operational budgets and supply. The SLDF at the start of 2767 had at best 10% of its former budget trickling in from tax collectors and administrators still loyal or alive. There would be no paychecks from here forward, and procurement divisions had no means to buy anything at any price. Things were grim. The SLDF teetered on the brink. Kerensky's forces had fought a needless war. They had learned that their home was gone and their leader replaced by a madman. They had no money, no country, and seemingly no future. Supplies were exhausted, ships needed refit and overhaul, and spares disappeared. Morale was accordingly near zero. They needed a fucking...
Yep. We need a miracle. We need something to happen. And the fact that we're still maintaining somewhat of an army and organization really speaks to Kerensky's leadership here. With how low the morale must be for everybody, I'm surprised that we're just not all running for the hills.
Miracle. What the Star League Defense Force had, though, was General Alexander Sergeyevich Kerensky. And angry Russians tend to make it into the history books. Kerensky had purpose and determination. Instead of weighing his options endlessly or sending his troops home, instead of obeying his government, instead of giving up and running away or trying to bargain and buy favor, Kerensky had told the usurper no. Just flatly, no. Amaris had mocked him in reply. Amaris had mocked him and challenged Kerensky to try to attack him. And it would have been suicidal, as the extensive space defense systems in the hegemony were designed to stop massed fleets and invasion forces.
Amaris would
and as said, Amaris had paid the price in conquering them, and yet every moment that Amaris had in the hegemony, he would be digging in and preparing to defend what he had claimed. It was an unenviable scenario to contemplate. Kerensky at this point had two choices: to drive into the hegemony immediately, to attack the Rimworld's Republic forces now deeply entrenched and in possession of the space defense systems and all the massive weapons stockpiles the hegemony had, or Kerensky could go kick the shit out of Amaris' homeland, the Rimworld's Republic. Kerensky decided that...
Oh, wait a minute. Because he had moved all of his forces into the inner sphere, then yeah, you could take everything that he's got and then use his own resources against him. And that's big brain. In a way, this is almost like actual RTS tactics. Granted, of course, this is like a situation where if you lose your base, you don't immediately lose. But I suppose that explains how we swapped positions and we're like now in the periphery and sending in people in order to take back the inner sphere.
That if Amaris would occupy his home, then Kerensky could burn Amaris's down. Well, more or less. There were strategic considerations for this. Kerensky rarely acted out of emotion, so this wasn't just done out of pure spite or want to exact revenge. This wasn't ego-driven, but a more calculated response. Kerensky refused to fall for Amaris' trap, and instead opted to hit Amaris' home to cut Amaris off from his beloved Rimworld's Republic, its resources, and any hope of significant reinforcement. As well, if the gamble proves successful, this would utterly trap Amaris' forces in the hegemony, buying Kerensky time to maneuver, politic, and perhaps involve the rest of the inner sphere. Additionally, the income of the Rimworld's Republic was exceptional, and by removing Amaris' purse strings even partially, he would make the inevitable throwdown in the hegemony far easier. Kerensky made his preparations. He told his men what they must do. He visited ships throughout the fleet and mustered his forces from jump points around the periphery. He made certain to immediately change the ciphers and communications keys for his entire fleet, as by now he was certain SLDF communications were totally compromised.
You gotta customize everything.
Capture and control of the hegemony. Orders were often hand-carried and on.
It's such a risky tactic. Not unheard of, though. We have seen moments in history where armies would have to use up their own supplies, or I think like eat up some of their own horses back in the day in order to simply make it through like a harsh winter or a really long trek. I'd love to know the actual thought process behind this move, however. I feel like this is more so a combination of this is a strategically sound plan, plus this is our last option, because there really isn't any other way we can get this done. We need the supplies, we need the people. If you don't have a proper home base and we don't have proper logistics going into this war, then there's absolutely no way that we're going to be able to win. So yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense in that aspect, but if it fails, then it's over. But I suppose any other option would be the same question. If that fails, then it's over. We can only make one move.
Radically increased his operational equipment stockpile by eliminating the most damaged ships, mechs, and tanks and stripped those of parts to keep the rest going. SLDF stockpiles were raided. Kerensky ordered sold what he didn't immediately need to war profiteers in the growing black market to keep the SLDF going. He merged ruined regiments into new combined regimental combat teams. He consolidated his forces and told them that they would conquer the Rimworld Republic and take it from Amaris before liberating the hegemony and restoring rightful order. Kerensky was not keen to make rapid strikes without proper intelligence. Cautiously, Kerensky assessed his situation, seeing what he was up against in the Rimworld Republic. Through his intelligence services, Kerensky suspected and then became aware of clandestine dealings in the inner sphere. Kurita had been a staunch supporter of Amaris and his dealings. Kerensky suspected that post-coup that arrangement was still in place. Meanwhile, House Merrick had extensively interfered with SLDF deployments during the Periphery War and now, afterwards, were apathetic to the cause of the SLDF, to say the least. The source of that contention was personal animosity. Kerensky once had a young Kenyan Merrick on his general staff and checked his ambitions, and Merrick never forgot. These complications meant that Kerensky could only possibly count on the other houses as, at best, potential allies. Even then, their responses were not enthusiastic.
They'll probably stay out of it.
They would at least not be maneuvering against him. And
look, I think it's going to be a situation where they're going to help only if they see that there's a clear chance that this is going to be the winning side. Either that, or they swoop in at the very last moment and take things for themselves, which, considering how BattleTech currently is, that might be how it goes.
The Periphery had an altogether more interesting response. The Periphery really didn't care the Cameron line had ended with a bang. Even if the whereabouts and status of Richard Cameron were currently unknown to the galaxy at large, the populations of the Periphery did, however, care deeply when the SLDF showed up to fight a brutal war on their home turf. The SLDF had emboldened the Periphery's long-standing anti-authoritarian, anti-inner streak by showing up to be exactly what they feared most, conquering assholes. But when Amaris took over, the Periphery soon saw their savior really didn't care a single fuck about them all that much. Amaris had issued orders for Kerensky to conquer the Periphery, to keep pressure on them, to crush them once and for all, and then to join Amaris's new empire. Upon realizing they were sold out, the Periphery was upset. For the Periphery had once at least somewhat trusted Amaris. After all, he was one of them. The Rimworld Republic was the greatest Periphery nation, after all. He was the nice fat guy who'd given them shitloads of money and weapons and pointed them at the SLDF, and now they realized they'd been played. The Periphery was now content to let Amaris deal with his own problems and let the SLDF leave uncontested. They had lost enough of their own and gained, perhaps, at least notionally, their independence. They were content to let things be. After
Amaris burned too many bridges. He doesn't have any allies that he can rely on anymore. I would imagine for the rest of the Periphery, though, the relationship would be kind of complicated and when it comes to the SLDF. Because, in a way, they're also responsible for the oppression, but also kind of not. Not interfering with them and losing a bunch of their people, though, sounds pretty reasonable.
To this point, the Periphery would offer no substantial opposition for Kerensky's new goal, to wrecking ball the Rimworld Republic. In fact, many Periphery states met with the general and provided him full transcripts, intelligence, and information on Amaris's duplicity and dealings.
Damn.
This information would make Kerensky's conquests all the smoother. Kerensky jumped on the Rimworld Republic with a slightly rejuvenated SLDF, and in time his conquest became a campaign of legend. While Amaris had taken the bulk of his military to occupy the hegemony, the Rimworld's Republic was not a complete pushover as far as the periphery states went. After all, this was the place that Amaris had forged into a conquering nation-state. It was a nation built by a paranoid, psychotic asshole. House Amaris had primed this nation for war at every level through generations of careful work to further their strategic aims. It maintained a reasonable standing army by periphery standards. It possessed a ruthlessly efficient internal security force, a tremendous strategic reserve, a well-educated population, and a massive defense industry. Taking the Rimworld's Republic was the smartest choice Kerensky could make. Taking it would cut Amaris off from extensively developed defense industry and ample recruiting grounds, not to mention a key source of income. On May 29, Kerensky issued the go order from his flagship McKenna's Pride. The fleet assembled at jump points, messages being hand-carried with new ciphers to ensure security. Across the periphery, forces abandoned their conquest to rejoin the main fleet, often carrying with them the contents of SLDF bases they'd stripped for necessary supplies. Troops falling back set nasty reminders that Starlink property was not to be trifled with. Concordat troops found that out the hard way, when upon entering a Starlink base it collapsed on their head after a mountain of charges went off.
Damn.
Similarly, across the periphery, Starlink bases were abandoned, trapped, and stripped of any and all resources Kerensky would need for his operation. This was an all-or-nothing gambit. Amaris had slowly bled the Rimworld Republic forces of their strength to set up his coup and occupation of the hegemony. It would still be a monumental endeavor. The Republic was enormous and well-provisioned, and while the Rimworld's Republic had dug in, they didn't have the numbers the SLDF massed fleet had. Every delay in attack would buy time for Amaris to fortify the Rimworld Republic and hegemony both. Any other commander would have opted for speed alone in a campaign of nuclear hellfire and motherfucking revenge. Any other commander would have let his men and women loose in the name of vengeance, to let slip the dogs of war and count the dead afterward. But Kerensky was not a monster.
Look, if you do that, it's cool, it sounds epic, but this isn't the final battle. Kerensky definitely has to have a plan after this, and for much, much further into the future.
He refused to authorize a total war approach, and saved weapons of mass destruction for hardened military targets. But it would still be a war. There would be casualties. Kerensky took a careful approach, trying at his hardest to not indiscriminately slaughter his enemies for the sake of a decisive, rapid campaign.
You still
He didn't
need
see
people.
the Rimworld's Republic as an enemy, merely, in this case, an adversary. He saw his job as to restore the peace from an unlawful usurper, not to punish a population or conquer purely to feed his army. Further, Kerensky knew he had to crush the Rimworld's Republic to strand Amaris in the hegemony, to cut Amaris off from the resources of the Rimworld's Republic and prevent a difficult two-front war. Amaris flipped out at the impending invasion and almost immediately called on his hidden army in the form of formerly loyal periphery allies to assist. Most chose now to do what Kerensky had done to Amaris. Say no. Amaris had betrayed them after all. A bare few moved to reinforce Amaris's holdings, but for the most part the stage was set for what unfolded. Kerensky split his forces to conquer effectively, with commands each having objectives, timetables, and resources appropriate to their abilities and talents. Further, he split some of his forces to go conduct reconnaissance in the hegemony, just to poke at Amaris and make him wonder if it were all a diversion. Kerensky put half his army under the command of his trusted adjutant, General Aaron D. Chevalier. Their forces ran with 3 armies each and 4 in reserve. The plan was to rapidly punch through the hegemony and roll them up before any counterattack was possible, leaving the capital for last. Kerensky sent a message to Amaris' stooge running the Rimworld's Republic as Amaris was busy playing police state in the hegemony. Kerensky offered surrender and no ill treatment if the Rimworld's Republic would merely stand down. Amaris' stooge said no, and then Kerensky attacked. In theory,
But look, at least he extended a hand of peace. Started with negotiations first before firing the first bullet. A man of principle. and an incredible planner. All of these different timetables and all of these different regiments being sent out to places where they would be the most effective. I can't even imagine trying to manage something like that. Like, I can't even manage multiple units in Dawn of War.
Kerensky intended was considered to be near impossible, if not exceptionally difficult. And doubly so with an army that effectively had no reserve or logistical support other than what they carried, scrounged, or stole.
One shot,
if they took any significant
opportunity.
losses, there was no real chance to replace anything.
Yeah.
Their numbers of mechs, tanks, rifles, bullets, and band-aids were finite. At first, Kerensky was cautious, both to spare his own men material losses and the civilian population the cruelty of war. But when the hidden army failed to respond to Amaris and the Rimworld Republic failed to counterattack, it was on like Donkey Kong. And the outcome was pretty fucking incredible. Kerensky conquered all 248 worlds in 3 short years. To say this was a blitzkrieg is a massive understatement. That's almost 7 worlds a month. 7 defended, garrison, militarized populations a month. One by one, the worlds fell like clockwork in a master plan. The SLDF was Kerensky's tempered vengeance visited upon Amaris' legacy while again carefully sparing damage to civilian infrastructure. What's worse, unwilling to budge his own forces to assist, Amaris could only sit and watch from occupied Terra as his home went dark one system at a time. The Rimworld Republic forces had the benefit of preparation and an extensive home field advantage. Further, they were bolstered by paramilitaries and extensive security forces. However, they didn't have the numbers of the SLDF. Kerensky embraced his tactical advantage and just steamrolled them into the earth while they died defending pointlessly. As the war rolled on, many Rimworld's units threw down their arms, risking the wrath of political officers none too pleased. The reason—
Okay, I understand why they would throw their guns down. 7 worlds a month? That's like an unending tide. Eventually, I'm gonna be out there on the battlefield, in the front lines, and I'm gonna get shot down, and my world's gonna get conquered. There's not a whole lot I'm gonna be able to do about that. So maybe I would want to join the winning side in this? Especially because Amaris isn't sending anybody to help. Bro is too paranoid about his own safety. Which is a good thing for us. Like, this is going so much smoother than I imagined. I guess Kerensky is just that guy. He's him.
The reason for abandoning the cause was simple. They saw themselves as citizens of the Rimworld Republic first and supporters of Amaris as a distant second.
Yeah.
Amaris had failed them and they weren't willing to die for a bib-wearing overlord. No, they were more inclined to follow Kerensky. And some did. Kerensky allowed them to serve and some would, with distinction, try to right the wrongs of their former overlord. That's not to say there weren't some holdouts. Some die-hard Rimworld Republic soldiers would just feign surrender to detonate suicide vests, echoing the sentiments of the periphery just a few short years earlier. As the Rimworld Republic government fell, armed militants and militias rose to fight their former overlords, the SLDF, or each other. Mass stockpiles of weapons found their way to the hands of increasingly angry populations intent on shooting anyone not aligned with their ideology. There was something else to consider as well. Authoritarians have a bad habit of leaving people in charge that they can trust rather than someone with a spine. Naturally, the administrator left in charge of the Rimworld's Republic, while loyal to Amaris and a capable bureaucrat, was, at most, a spineless yes-man. Kerensky conquered his way to the heart of the Rimworld's Republic in an impossibly short time span considering the above complications. I'm sparing you the details of a 3-year campaign at this juncture, so that I may perhaps revisit it in detail later for future broadcast. At the end of this campaign, all that was left was Apollo, the capital of the Rimworld's Republic. Kerensky had approached Apollo carefully, saving it for last. He'd thoroughly isolated it before this point, blocking HPG traffic that the SLDF decided the Rimworld's Republic didn't need to hear.
I would.
Patrolled the system to ensure no use of pirate points for messages or reinforcements, and jump points were now long secured by the SLDF. Kerensky wanted the leaders of the Rimworld's Republic to sit in communications blackout, wondering what the hell was going on, stewing in their own
the psychological warfare aspect of that too. Completely dark. You're just sitting there waiting for an inevitable doom versus an army that is immensely powerful, much larger than anything you have left. Kerensky, with his information networks, also probably knew about how spineless this guy was, so that might have played a factor into this tactic.
Fear. In fact, Apollo had been cut off through careful maneuvering by Kerensky for well over a year by the time he struck.
A year?
Kerensky took to the field, making Planetfall himself to find loyalist Amaris forces engaged in a brutal suppression campaign against their own people. Further, newly constructed fortresses provided some resistance, though they were dangerously undermanned. Internal security had obviously been an issue for some time. Before long, the SLDF had things in hand, with defectors and surrendering RimWorld's forces deeply straining the SLDF's capacity to hold prisoners of war. By the time the SLDF dropped in on the grand capital of the RimWorld Republic, the SLDF were seen as heroes and liberators by a war-weary population. The average RimWorld citizen had long been under the thumb of a ruthless tyrant from a family of tyrants.
For years.
And for the first time in their lives had a chance to live the promise of a freer life. When the SLDF rolled into Amaris' capital, they found the streets full of jubilant celebration upon their arrival, and Amaris' chancellor hanging from a lamppost. The government of the RimWorld's Republic was utterly crippled, its soldiers dead, surrendered or defecting.
You win the people's heart, you win the war. I'm sure there was also news that escaped from the other planets that had been taken over that the people there hadn't been brutalized or completely mangled. They weren't oppressed. We sort of need them on our side. That's just something Amaris does not understand. This is such an incredibly massive W, though. And I suspect that we came out of this war with more resources than what we started with, so now we're gonna actually have a chance to get back to the inner sphere.
Its bureaucracy in pieces and its government stockpiles either seized by the SLDF or looted by growing warlords. Kerensky was not interested in garrisoning these worlds with any force. He aimed to rapidly move on as inner sphere houses rapidly mobilized their own forces to absorb portions of the once mighty RimWorld's Republic for, provisionally, their own good. After all, it's free real estate. Through great house annexation, many worlds of the RimWorld's Republic would, in time, become the periphery-facing territories of the Lydran Commonwealth and other nation-states. Some would splinter off to become pirate kingdoms, fiefdoms, and micronations. In time, others would disappear completely, content to be ignored by the galaxy at large. Kerensky did not have time to think about the fate of the RimWorld's Republic.
Inner sphere time.
He took time to consider the path forward. The RimWorld's campaign had taken a toll on his forces, but by now the SLDF was well practiced in moonlight acquisition. Every world they conquered, they stole supplies of armaments, tech, and parts from the RimWorld's Republic military and defensive industries storehouses. Every time a ship became stranded, damaged beyond repair, or decrewed, they stripped it for parts and moved on. Every time a regiment was appreciably reduced in manpower, Kerensky would fold in another and then keep fighting. The once fairly green pre-periphery insurrection SLDF was now a veteran of many hard campaigns, each and every unit filled now with hardened, battle-scarred veterans.
Oh, that I didn't even consider. The 3 years of war, how efficient they all have to be at it by this point. Yeah, these soldiers you can't get by training them in a military academy. If we were speaking in like Halo terms, would these people at this point be considered something similar to like the ODSTs? I don't know if it's an apt comparison, but at least in my mind, it makes sense.
While equipment would be maintained, the SLDF was slowly losing its strength all the same. Kerensky knew that they needed time to rest, for training camps to be set up, and for new blood to fill its depleted ranks.
Yeah.
Kerensky, being not a moron, decided to wait a few years to rebuild and thoroughly explore how to utterly destroy Stefan without eradicating the cradle of humanity in the process. Amaris had spent his time digging in. The RimWorld's Republic army is slowly making the hegemony a death trap. Each and every world prepared for invasion that was not only possible, but now inevitable.
The thing is, right, the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be to crack that shell. But if you go too early, then you don't have enough manpower to even make a good fight in the first place. It's tough to know when to pull the trigger, but I guess when you're ready, you're ready. All you can really do is prepare as best as you can.
Cut off from his beloved Republic and watching Kerensky smash it from afar had made Amaris a wee bit bitter. This steeled his resolve to resist at all costs, for there was no going home now. There was also the consideration of watching your own home slowly burn and what that does to a man. In the case of Stefan Amaris, it drove him slightly crazy. Well, crazier. For years now, the heart of Star League had been under the thumb of Stefan Amaris. His atrocities would become a bleak mark in the history books of mankind.
Frowning is illegal.
Weekly and sometimes daily, Amaris would broadcast his message to loyal subjects of his empire, while controlling the spread of information he did not approve of. Rumors of brutality, murder, and chaos had escaped Amaris's empire, at extreme cost in some cases, but there was little in the way of hard data or information. SLDF fleets and observers had tried to gather extensive information, but it came at a cost. The SDS and drone fleets were a lethal countermeasure to SLDF curiosity. Amaris in his own dispatches painted himself as the liberator of the hegemony, the conqueror of a corrupt noble house, the man who slew the tyrants of the Cameron line, and was now a guiding hand toward a prosperous future. Some
Sure, buddy.
chose to believe these lies. Others found themselves incapable of such self-deception. Kerensky took another tactic. Firstly, while gathering intelligence for the push to the hegemony, Kerensky began a PR war. Publicly, he thanked the great houses for not aiding Amaris in his criminal actions. He spread the rumors he knew, painting
Okay, we do know that some of the great houses did help out, but publicly speaking, you don't want to reveal that so that the houses don't turn on you. Make them look good, and make the offer of joining you in the war very appealing. If you can get any sort of broadcast into the inner sphere and get the people to know that there is hope, then things will turn around. This is so smart. And I love how all the pieces are moving together. Amaris's whole regime here is going to fall apart bit by bit. It's just a matter of time.
Amaris to be an incompetent, tyrannical, and ruthless dictator interested principally in punishing those who did not fall in line. Kerensky aired Amaris's dirty laundry, showing the inner sphere who he truly was. Simultaneously behind the scenes, Kerensky met with the leaders of the great houses. His message was simple. Get off the fucking fence and choose a goddamn side because I'm about to drop a hammer on this asshole. Or something like that. The response was mixed. The lords made a laundry list of excuses for their failures to support the general up to this point, to include inevitably the threat of Amaris conquering them if they played sides. One by one, however, they agreed to give the general some support, some in the form of supplies, some in the form of intelligence, some in the use of bases from which to stage for invasion. Needless to say, it was significantly less than full support for Kerensky's cause, but it was at least not support going to Amaris. Surprisingly,
as long as they're not opposing us, that's fine. The moment they see that we're winning pretty clearly, though, I'm sure they'll hop on. And it's natural for them to act like this because they have their own best interests in mind. It just makes sense. Can't blame them, especially considering how Cameron was treating them.
Help came from a different avenue. After the general went public, addressing the need to put down the tyrant Amaris, Kerensky found a wave of volunteers. Soldiers, sailors, marines, aerospace jockeys, and Solaris fighters, all from house militaries, began to arrive, often with stolen equipment. Totally AWOL, these units.
Yeah, if I was there, I would join them. Like, being oppressed for how long now? You either conform or die. If there's any sort of rebellion, I'm there.
pledged to follow the general in order to set things right. Many of these men and women felt their own houses had been incredibly dishonorable in not helping the general and so set things right by their own hands. Kerensky didn't turn them away and organized them into volunteer corps. By the time the invasion begun,
we need everybody.
He had 36 fucking regiments of them. Operation Chieftain.
That's awesome.
The invasion of the Terran hegemony was launched July the 14th, 2772. The painstaking retaking of the Terran hegemony systems from Amaris would ultimately cost millions of lives and several years. The Rimworld's military, realizing their own homes had been destroyed and occupied, realizing that their homeworlds were now fighting each other for territory burning or unlivable, made every effort to fight to the bloody end. There was no retreat for them, for Amaris's plans had never included fight an angry Russian tooth and nail for the future of the Inner Sphere.
Yeah, it's no wonder that we're going to be taking heavy losses here. They've had such a long time to entrench themselves, plus the fact that they're fighting with their backs against the wall. Those people, those soldiers are going to be incredibly ferocious in their tactics. All you can really do is slowly whittle away at them. Every single planet that we take is such a massive blow.
For those foolish enough to surrender, Amaris's political troops would kill them first. This was a grand defense in depth conducted across the hegemony, with the aim being to draw the SLDF into a war of attrition and slowly grind them to dirt. Kerensky's plan was expensive in manpower and equipment. The terrifying space defense systems had to be overcome, and even with extensive intelligence gathering from hidden fleets, clandestine operations, and even reports flying in from the hegemony from various insurrection groups, it was to be a bloody affair. Kerensky's SLDF had been honed into a remarkably efficient fighting machine, now no longer a mere defense force, but an avenging army of an ideology. Star League and all that it represented. So long as the fleet moved and the army fought, for their fellow brother and sister, Star League was alive. Kerensky's battle plan was to cut off world after world. From the outside in, slowly Kerensky encircled the hegemony, and he struck with purpose and precision. From July 2770 to January 2777, Kerensky took world after world away from Amaris. Amaris's forces had nowhere to run, and they fought like cornered beasts. They burned fields, cities, and worlds. They used every weapon they had. Atomics, biological weapons, suicide attacks. They tried to grind the SLDF down. They used the...
Yeah. Just burn the ground, burn all the resources, make sure they don't get anything at all, even at the cost of your own people, your own homes, your own planet. Man, this is so good. I don't know. I'm just super into this right now. This tug of war between Kerensky and Amaris is just so enthralling.
Human population as shields. They forced Kerensky to pay for progress in bodies, and take his time in doing so. Kerensky's strategy was to cut the invasion corridors into slices and put 2 armies in each. Raiding units under Aaron de Chevalier had learned much, namely that the SDS systems in place were not to be trifled with, and that the worlds were reinforced all to hell. The plan then became to cut the hegemony apart from the outside in, to maintain constant pressure so that reinforcements could not be shuffled from one point to the next, and thereby denying Amaris the benefits of a defense in depth. It was important to not stop the pace of the invasion once it started, otherwise Amaris could shuffle and dig in. What they found when the invasion started horrified the SLDF. It would take the deployment of the SLDF's full 1,000 infantry regiments to conquer many built-up worlds as Amaris had built terrifying defenses. Some worlds were no more than awful killing fields, with Kerensky unwilling to authorize weapons of mass destruction for a decisive or quick victory. When the local forces were defeated, Infantry divisions earned their keep hunting down hegemony security forces, pro-Amaris paramilitaries, and brainwashed citizenry, afraid Amaris would punish them if they didn't fight the SLDF. The pace of the conflict made Kerensky fully aware that this would not end easily. He sent in forces to set up legitimate judiciaries to judge and punish those who assisted Amaris's regime and its many excesses. He sent in the SLDF Logistics Corps, now well-trained to strip useful materials to replace his stockpiles, and he ordered garrisons left to ensure that the chaos of the Rimworld's Republic collapse would not repeat in the hegemony.
Exactly. We already learned from the Rimworlds. When we're punishing these people who worked for Amaris, we have to do it within the jurisdiction that the law allows us to. Because if you go overboard and go for like the eye for an eye approach, then the people are just gonna see that. It's just gonna be the same thing all over again. We're just gonna be another Amaris. And that can't be the image that is shown. Everybody needs to be on the same page to know that we're reinstating the Starlink Defense Force and not just becoming the next tyrannical leader.
Kerensky arrived, conquered, and left functioning governments and infrastructure in his wake. This was not a blitzkrieg to tear down a government. This was a true liberation. Still, the cost would be in human lives. The Star League Defense Forces found the drone ships and space defense systems were manned by elite teams now all too familiar with their operations. Despite thorough strategic considerations, the SLDF found itself utterly incapable of attacking the SDS systems without serious losses. Each and every attack was at enormous cost, losing ships they could no longer replace. Groundside Amaris's forces would respond to invasion by falling back to extensive fortifications and using every weapon at their disposal, to include nuclear warheads and chemical attacks. Amaris's troops were content to burn a world, its population, and even its future habitability to cinders to deny it to the SLDF. After all, denying a world was not that grand a gesture for someone who'd already lost their home. Each of these battles cost the SLDF personnel and time, in many cases to capture worlds heavily scarred by total war. Despite successes, the war was slowing considerably. By 2774, the operation was grinding to a halt. They'd conquered 100 worlds, but the pace was slowing exponentially. Total casualties were at 10% across the SLDF from the start of—
It's hard. It's hard. The defenses, the torching of worlds, and the war fatigue that the people have to experience. But unfortunately, there isn't any other option. I don't think Amaris is going to surrender anytime soon.
This campaign, significantly higher in systems guarded by SDS systems. No matter their strategy, planning, or talent, the pace of invasion was slowing. Often enough, the SLDF encountered horrific conditions among the population which they then had to safeguard and look after, eating into shrinking supplies. Garrisoning these worlds depleted manpower,
can't leave them
and taking
behind.
care of a population was a further complication. But Kerensky saw it as his duty, and did not shrink from it. Further, Amaris's troops had now formed the opinion in mind that the best sort of shield was human, and forced civilian populations into internment camps, booby-trapping them thoroughly so any who ran—
I mean, of course they would. After seeing how Kerensky treated people, then they would know that that was his weak point. His kryptonite, essentially.
or were careless died in a messy fashion. This was how Amaris's men often managed to fall back, by throwing civilians and hostages into the mix and leaving the SLDF to solve the moral quandary. The SLDF was almost at breaking point, until Amaris made a rather fateful decision. He ordered abandon what he considered to be indefensible worlds without SDS systems or, to his taste, extensive fortifications. He pulled his forces back and reinforced what he had, concentrating his armies into what were already supremely reinforced defensive positions with years of enhanced fortifications. The SLDF quickly jumped on these undefended worlds, glad to gain ground with no loss of fleet resources. Unfortunately, even with this new gain of ground, it was there that the invasion hit a snag. Losses to ships and personnel were piling up. Surviving in newly functioning Star League bureaucracy was having massive issues upkeeping Kerensky's forces. Further,
You know, that makes sense. The more ground they take, the more they spread out thin. And Amaris being able to refortify and not lose his troops meaninglessly on worlds that they couldn't realistically defend just makes it so that his defenses become stronger, and it becomes even tougher. It doesn't matter if we have them surrounded, if they'll continue to be stronger than we are.
Further, the massively reinforced SDS systems were nearly impenetrable. The war had destroyed cities and populations in the crossfire. Millions of people were starting to call for the general's head for the destruction he had wrought up to this point. Many more millions were dead and cold in the ground. Kerensky decided to halt the campaign while the SLDF rested. There would be no fighting for months as new bases were built. Supplies were stockpiled, forces rested, weapons repaired, and the problem of the SDS systems yet to be overcome.
Makes sense.
This would be an opportunity for the SLDF to regroup and prepare for the final push to Terra. Worlds began the slow process of healing, doing their best to overcome massive infrastructure damage. Soon, Kerensky had another issue. Fucking Kurita. House Kurita had been a thorn in the side of Kerensky from the start.
Yeah.
From opposing fleet movements.
Didn't Kurita also somewhat assist Amaris too? I mean, Kurita has all the really cool mechs, but yeah, they are more warlike in their ideals, so this isn't surprising.
Since supporting Amaris, at least, well, unofficially. Soon, Kurita made a proper power play. He arrived on hegemony worlds bordering his territory, worlds free of Amaris' forces, with what Kurita called a relief force. The Kuritan relief force was a giant fucking army with civil servants, engineers, and bureaucrats. Essentially, Kurita was annexing territory and saying that the general would stop him. And while Kerensky thought about slapping the shit out of him, he really couldn't fight a two-front war. He publicly rebuked Kurita, pulling...
Yeah... Oh, I played enough Total War to know that's never a good idea. No matter what, you gotta make sure that your other end, or your neighboring countries, are at the very least neutral with you. But heck, even if you're friends with them, the opportunistic ones will still screw you over if you don't have any defenses ready that they can see, so yeah, not surprising.
His forces back and realized in the end it didn't matter anymore. He now had the forces not tied down in garrison, and at least the people of that world would have a government and assistance. Even if it was awful, Kurita, Katana wearing asshats talking about honor and stuff. Kerensky couldn't afford to deal with the Kurita bullshit at this time. He was thankful he could bring his forces to fight instead of garrison duties. Realizing that Kerensky wasn't going to drop 50 megatons of Russian whoop-ass on them, the other houses soon followed suit, annexing parts of the hegemony for safekeeping, humanitarian reasons, or whatever bullshit they could offer for the land grab. Only House Davion was upfront with Kerensky, saying that they'd take the worlds off his hands in exchange for full support militarily, logistically, and to some extent financially.
Okay.
When Kerensky stuck that deal with Davion, houses Liao and Steiner followed suit. Kurita didn't, though, because Kurita is an asshole and will always be an asshole. Prove me wrong. With resources now flowing into the SLDF and garrisons now free to assist in the final push toward Terra, events would soon take an interesting turn. January of 2775, Kerensky's extensive intelligence services became aware of a disturbing new development. Amaris' forces would exfiltrate a world, stripping it of its resources, and then setting it alight with nukes before leaving. These worlds were abandoned and destroyed to tighten Amaris' defenses further, but also to deny staging points for Kerensky. Being that he was not a monster and genuinely gave a shit, this set Kerensky into action. Amaris...
That is Kerensky's greatest strength and his greatest weakness. Amaris knows this, so he's gonna exploit it as much as possible. But I'm assuming at this point in time, we don't really have anything that can be like, press of a button and rejuvenate a world. The moment something gets nuked, it's gonna be gone for several hundreds or thousands of years.
In the past, had used nukes defensively, like one might use a fly swatter. but it was always against the SLDF, or the SLDF and anything near it. Nukes are nukes after all. However, at this point, Amaris was intent on creating a huge problem for Kerensky at any cost. Kerensky sent 12 Army Corps forward to immediately land on those worlds, and what he found horrified him. Amaris had turned his nukes on civilian populations. As his men evacuated worlds, they bombed cities, fields, and factories so that Kerensky would have to move in, save, and take care of an irradiated, starving population. And as a tactic, it worked. Amaris knew Kerensky's character. Amaris was playing to Kerensky's guilt over causing the casualties he had thus far. Kerensky's savior complex required him to intervene.
For the citizens as well, I can understand a lot of mixed feelings going on now, because on the one hand, you want to be free from Amaris' rule. On the other hand, because the SLDF started fighting, this happened. My entire family got nuked. Like, how do I feel about this rebellion that's going on? It's hard to imagine. It would be very complicated, but I think there would be a lot of hate for everything.
But Kerensky did so smartly. He involved the Great Houses for two reasons. One, they wanted the territory and didn't care if the planet was a little roughed up. Two, Kerensky wanted them to see firsthand how fucking crazy Amaris was. They took the territory and the lesson. Amaris would have zero possibility for assistance from outside, other than what he currently held. There was, however, a glimmer of good news in all this mess. When Kerensky liberated Nirasaki, he found a place in a very bad way. The world was nearly ruined. SLDF forces saved what and who they could, but they found a certain place had been thoroughly ransacked by Amaris during the occupation. The Nirasaki Computers Collective had been on the forefront of artificial intelligence, and when Amaris took over the SDS and automated drone systems, he ransacked their offices, deported their lead researchers to Terra, and burned everything and everyone he couldn't take. However, in the depths of the facility, Dr. Catherine Glimp had years before hidden a hard drive with all the data on the SDS that Nirasaki Computers Collective had ever researched. These blueprints, schematics, and documents proved it was possible to jam the control system used for combat command and control of the drone units and the links between them.
That is game-changing. I mean, thank goodness we investigated the facility, and whether intentional or unintentional, like, massive W to the scientist.
This information, it would be possible to fight an SDS and win, though at a cost. Within the weeks, though, the SLDF had an edge, and soon, the war was on the road again. The closer to Terra the SLDF advanced, the worse it got. Even with the edges they had, the numbers they had, the training and experience they shared, Amaris had by this time again drawn his forces into tighter and tighter defensive lines. By concentrating his defenses, the Rimworld's Republic forces, plus their new regiments, had made the war more difficult the further Kerensky advanced. By the time the conquest of Terra was on the table, it was 2777. And the SLDF was down to 35% of its pre-war forces. Many veterans of the war had been fighting for so long they'd forgotten how the war started. Many had been injured, rotated out of action, and then rejoined their old unit, now merged into the remnants of 5 others. Some veterans bore scars of 10 or more years of hard fighting. Some veterans had fought for over a decade to find their homeworlds burned and their family long dead. For them, there was nothing but duty, really. They were invested in the outcome of the war just to see it done. Amaris had to be brought to justice. That's all there was to it anymore. Through all this, they'd remembered their oaths. The Star League was alive so long as they fought.
I just feel really sad. Sad for everybody in this situation, honestly. Look at Amaris, man. But like, can you even imagine how it would feel to fight for so long that you forgot when you started fighting? To see your family again, to reclaim your home world, go back home, and then just see it a burning and charred mess? This is giving me Karak is burning vibes.
Final liberation of Terra started January 23rd, 2777, and in itself it took over 2 years of brutal fighting. The road to Terra had been punishing in the extreme. The majority of Kerensky's ground forces were dead, destroyed, disbanded, or lost, and half of his navy was littered between the periphery and the cradle of humanity. What ships they had left were held together largely by the salvaged remains of their sister vessels. Few ships, if any, bore no mark of the war in some major way. The crews, however, were hardened fighters willing to see through to the end. The road to Terra was going to cost them more than they thought. By this point, as stated, the other houses of the Inner Sphere saw the writing on the wall and decided to back the general, not the usurper. There were precious resources at last to afford a final operation, one last huzzah. Military supplies and refugee assistance poured in from the Capellan Confederation, the Lyran Commonwealth, and the Federated Sons. Not House Kurita, though. Again,
of course not.
A most shameful display. As a historian,
shameful display. Yeah, I gotta play Shogun 2 at some point. Just so many games on the list.
And I can think to only say this, Kurita has always been kind of a dick. Just saying. Anyways, with such backing, with financial and material assistance, with fresh blood and parts and equipment, Kerensky proceeded toward the endgame. January 23rd of 2777, Kerensky invaded the most heavily defended world in the known galaxy. Pardon me for phrasing it this way, but you don't just walk into Terra. Terra had been reinforced over the centuries to be impossible to invade. Only Amaris had ever succeeded in conquering it through generations of preparation by his dynastic line. The exploitation of an idiot First Lord, brutal cunning, and sheer audacity. Terra had been turned into a jewel of an interstellar empire by the Golden Age and the wealth of Star League, and then reinforced by a government that saw defense spending as a great way to create jobs and create peace of mind. And these weren't just the greatest space defense systems ever made. No. They were now manned and operated by people who had spent years training for this. They were manned by people who had nothing to lose, and were more than willing to go down in a blaze of glory. Let's touch on these obstacles to assault before you could even land on Terra. First issue was the space defense systems. These were enormous battle stations guarding the jump points. I'll talk about the KF drive and jump ship someday, but let's just say this. Most, if not all, traffic into a star system comes from the jump points located at the zenith and nadir points of the star, where you will find
zenith and nadir. The point in the sky or celestial sphere directly above an observer. The point on the celestial sphere directly below an observer. Zenith and nadir. Sorry, just trying to make sure I know exactly what's going on. English is not my first language, so there's a couple of words that I'm not going to know of. So what I'm getting at is essentially whenever you're traveling to some place, there is a predictable place where you're going to show up at, and because of that, you can set up defenses in preparation for it. That, plus the fact that the sphere and graph that we saw earlier basically showed that there were defenses everywhere covering the entire planet, so I don't think there's a blind spot that we can exploit at all. Which actually, speaking of, have there been assassination attempts on Amaris yet? I'm sure there probably have been, but then again, Amaris is also incredibly paranoid, so those would be extremely difficult to pull off.
Find the jump stations. Around these jump stations in the Sol system, the Terran wing of the space defense systems had built enormous battle stations ready to beat the brakes off anyone who jumped through. Anyone who's played EVE Online would probably recognize this as the classic old-school gate camp, salt harvesting included. Further in the system, there were enormous batteries and defense systems located on Luna, in stations around Terra, and on the ground. Further, there was the single most expensive and advanced drone ship system ever built. Okay, what's a drone ship? Alright, imagine a warship weighing many thousands of metric tons. Now imagine it's completely filled with computers designed to detect and murder intruders. Fill it to the brim with weapons and armor. Then, since it's not filled with meat bags, keep in mind it can maneuver and fly like a goddamn missile. Also, since it's not filled with mouth breathers, it can take a tremendous amount of damage and keep fighting. Lastly, these were directed and driven by thinking AI that had no compassion, knew no fear, felt no pain, and were willing to do anything to accomplish its objective, protect Terra. There were 250 of these fucking things waiting in the Terran system. They were on active patrol, they were ready to respond, and instantly set to attack at the first sign of trouble. They were so adept at their job that SLDF scout vessels had to routinely pop in to observe from out in the Oort cloud, to avoid being absolutely murdered by the drone systems. And that's not the best part. Amaris had even ordered the enormous sunshade protecting terraform Venus to be moved and used as a giant sun laser. Yes, Amaris had gone bonkers and become Dr. Evil at this point. The fragile sunshade tore when they maneuvered it, and Amaris got really mad. Venus went from a paradise world to inhospitable within a single generation. I mention this in detail not because I trend toward tangent, as you know I do, but I want you to understand, this was Amaris' thinking. Have a huge pile of military assets and go, no, I want a giant space doom laser powered by the sun. Mr. Editor, I want you to add Venus to the list of things Amaris ruined. Thank you. Closer into the system, there were extensive service batteries located on Luna and stations surrounding Terra and, of course, on the planet itself. Batteries designed to eliminate any approaching fleet on their own through massive, accurate fire at standoff range. Now, once Kerensky was past all these space-based problems, if even he could manage that, he would have to invade Terra itself. Each and every major city on the planet was fortified and manned by fanatically loyal divisions willing to die for the self-crowned emperor. They'd seen their homeland disappear and realized there was nothing left to fight for but Emperor Amaris. After all, escape was now impossible. Amaris had long kept his elite, most fanatical, and most talented divisions close to home. He drilled them endlessly for a situation just like this. Kerensky had spent a long time thinking about this day. He'd been left for dead in the periphery and then rose again to conquer it. He'd made peace with the periphery, fought a civil war, conquered the Rimworld's republic, conquered the Terran hegemony, bypassed and overcome 1,000 challenges up to this point. He'd beaten defenses engineered to be near unbreakable time and again. He'd kept the SLDF together, gave them purpose, and led them to victory after victory, but he'd never given in to being a monster. No matter the losses, no matter the blood spilled, he remembered his oath. Through his strength of will and the strength of his forces, he remembered and honored their oath. He wasn't
It's individuals like Kerensky that are the reason why I enjoy things like dark fantasy and, I guess, grimdark sci-fi universes. Without these people who can be a shining beacon of humanity, what is the point of the setting being grimdark, apart from just being depressing? In many ways, the dark setting is used as a tool to emphasize the strength of humanity. And despite all of those odds, being able to overcome all of this is just so incredibly inspiring. And it's even more compelling when the person who is the shining beacon of mankind isn't perfect. They also have their own mistakes that they've committed and things that they regret doing. And despite all of that, they still keep on pushing forward.
Just a general at this point. He was Starleague, and Starleague was in town for the big show. Even after all he'd suffered, he didn't act in anger upon the eve of invasion. He offered Amaris a single chance to lay down his arms and surrender, and for him to be treated humanely with the promise of a fair trial. But for Amaris, losing a home, losing a nation,
he has nothing left to lose,
and a coup makes a man a bit crazy. Amaris had watched it all burn. He'd watched everything he'd ever achieved fall away like ash in the wind. Amaris refused to surrender in an insane, rambling message. Kerensky realized his choice was made, and it was on like Donkey Kong. Step 1 was to destroy the orbital battle stations guarding the jump points. For Kerensky, it was a welcome challenge. Kerensky had made a career by embracing creative problem-solving. Kerensky took 20 jump ships loaded to the gills, carrying between them a sum total of 60 dropships. Each dropship was stripped of weapons, packed with extra armor and craploads of explosives, and then autopiloted into kamikaze attacks en masse to destroy the stations. And there was the goddamn drone fleet to worry about. If they converged on the drop points, Kerensky would be cut apart piecemeal if his forces arrived.
Gotta get rid of them.
2 ships cannot occupy the same point in space, so jumps would have to be staggered. If the fleet arrived one by one, they'd die to the drone ships and their firepower defending the jump points. So, at this point, a sacrifice was needed. Volunteers from the SLDF Navy formed a separate flotilla, and they jumped to a dangerous pirate point in system, an act risking misjumping into God knows where. This flotilla had one objective: pull the drone fleet away from the jump points and take as many as they could with them. And so they did. The Star League drone task force went down like screaming banshees, cutting a swath through the drone fleet. Warships, kamikaze drone ships cut the fleet to pieces. The Star League anti-drone task force hammered the drones at any range, ramming when weapons failed, sacrificing themselves for their mission. The debris field from this battle stretched half the solar system. In the end, the SLDF anti-drone task force died a glorious death. Each and every ship burned to cinders by thinking machines. However, their sacrifice brought Kerensky an opening. 40
What happened? How the hell do you tell people to do this at the very end of the war, where they're just about to see actual victory, to give them a speech and motivate them to give their lives? Honestly, I wish this was made into a series. In many ways, I can see certain similarities to the story of Attack on Titan in here. And we all know how popular that anime popped off, so what about BattleTech? I think it's got everything that it needs to be a really successful show.
Brave and mad crews had destroyed over 100 drone ships in a 2-day manic space battle. Brave lads, all of them. With the jump points now clean, 932 warships converged from 8 separate staging worlds and began high-G maneuvers for Terror itself. This was insane. Because again, jump points are fixed and there are well-established safety protocols to prevent people from landing on top of each other. No one had ever before, and no one has ever since tried to jump a fleet this size into such a small area. But these were extraordinary times. Jump safeties were overridden, and standard protocols thrown away. The order was for crews to jump as fast as possible, giving them 5 scant minutes to clear before the next group flew in. Kerensky made a small speech before the throwdown, and with that, it began. Amazingly, only 20 ships misjumped or had drive failures. Some emerged inside the other before exploding, and still the SLDF plowed onward. Through suicidal ramming tactics against the remaining drone ships, madman sacrifices, and a willingness to get this final task done at any cost. Through the loss of an enormous amount of lives, vessels, and time, Terra was finally open. Kerensky soon made landfall, taking to the field in his Orion battle mech. 30 divisions made the first drop under a canopy of all the aerospace fighters the SLDF had left. All space defense stations were silenced at great cost, and the warships hovered overhead to provide close orbital fire support. Kerensky landed himself to retake his hometown on the Moscow front. And there, in the ruins of his beloved Moscow, he saw what the Rimworld's Republic military had made of once magnificent cities. Needless to say, he was a bit mad at all this, and only accepted the surrender of the 33rd Amaris Dragoons after they pleaded with him for mercy. Any mercy. Over 2 hours of sustained government-issue ass-kicking. Among the ruins of his hometown, Kerensky found his family, who had gone underground, endured, and formed the backbone of the local resistance movement. From this moment on, Kerensky fought with renewed purpose.
Holy shit, thank goodness. I'm sure at this point Kerensky has seen so many worlds completely nuked to heck, and the devastation that has caused, but this is deeply personal. Amaris kinda dodged the bullet there with his family surviving, but well, he's gonna eat this next bullet here in a second.
He was emboldened because in the ashes of Moscow, against all probability, he found his family alive and well and realized not all was lost. Kerensky ground Europe and Asia beneath his mech for the next 2 years, breaking Amaris's grip on the world, one division at a time, one city at a time, one fortress and strong point at a time. From Spain to the Far East, Kerensky conquered a hemisphere, deliberately searching out and eradicating every mode of resistance. Things got so bad for Amaris's goons that they resorted to using human shields and firefights as a regular battle tactic to slow SLDF operations. By the time Kerensky was ready to deal with Amaris proper, the war on Terra was years old and the planet extensively ravaged from sustained combat without any quarter. Amaris was using any means to slow the SLDF down, with battlefield nuclear ordnance being increasingly common. Amaris was in North America and Kerensky hit it with landings in Mexico and Alaska. He'd done his best to spare civilian casualties, but now was the time to end this madness. Now was the time to end Stefan Amaris' reign. Now was the time to capture Amaris and bring him to trial. Enough had died. Kerensky took the lead himself. It should be noted that the defense of North America might have succeeded if it weren't for Amaris being a goofy bastard and utterly mad at this point. The SLDF was beat to hell, and Amaris' goons were fighting like mad bastards from extensively well-prepared defenses. Amaris insisted on taking control of the defenses personally, and by the time the capital was surrounded, RimWorld's units were using mass suicide attacks to drive the enemy back at any cost. When Unity City fell and the SLDF marched in, Amaris had fled. As the SLDF slowly approached Amaris,
damn it, of course he would run. Please tell me that we catch up to him somehow.
Amaris' last fortified holdings in North America, there was a pleasant surprise. While surrounding the last of Amaris' holdings on the Imperial City, SLDF patrols encountered a bare handful of hardened survivors. In heavy radiation gear and looking quite like mad wasteland warriors, from the irradiated hellscape of cratered occupied Terra emerged hardened freedom fighters, among them Elizabeth Hazen and Colleen Schmidt. They identified themselves as the ghosts of the Black Watch, and they had a modest request. They wanted a piece of the action. As it turns out,
of course, I mean, of course they would survive the nukes. They already survived one. What's a few more, right? God damn. I love these guys.
You can't kill the goddamn Black Watch. Nukes are merely inconvenient. Through the coup and the brutal realities of the occupation, the Black Watch had been reborn as the ghosts of the Black Watch and had dedicated their entire energies of every waking day to fight Amaris at every possible turn. Their chief occupation for the better part of a decade had been vengeance upon the usurper. In order, so far they had survived nuclear bombardment, hunter-killer task forces, assassins, and all the mercenaries hired to make them go away. For over a decade, Amaris had been haunted by the sound of bagpipes in his distant memory, and further memories of satchel chargers narrowly missing the opportunity to delete him. For 10 years, Amaris had worried about the possible survivors and had sent his best operatives again and again to wipe them out, and one by one the Black Watch had put them all in the cold ground.
The Black Watch significantly contributed to his mental deterioration, and that has led to him making so many mistakes up till now. But to fight this fight for 10 plus years and still go on, it's not like they were surrounded by allies. They were far behind enemy lines, and I don't even know if they knew of any victories that were going on in the periphery worlds. Possibly some news, and especially the broadcast from Kerensky might have reached them. But these people are superhuman. Their will, their conviction to this one task is insane.
And now, on the eve of the endgame, they reappeared to serve once more. They provided Kerensky with incredibly detailed intelligence, noting exact pro-Amaris divisions and operatives, their location, strength, patrol routes, and habits. They'd prepared for the liberation by causing chaos as only they could. And for their last request, they wanted back in the SLDF to take to the field once more and help finish the job. Kerensky said yes. The legendary Black Watch mounted up and from there on out participated in the final SLDF military operations to bring Amaris down, serving as a furious sledgehammer force and leading the weary SLDF through its hardest fights. It is my opinion that these legendary warriors appearing at this very critical moment gave the SLDF that last necessary push to see this through to the very end.
I can see that.
Since they represented the...
Bro, if I was an SLDF soldier, we had finally made it all the way here to Terra, and we had suffered still so many more casualties and so many nukes, and we don't recognize my hometown anymore. We see these people still alive, still fighting the good fight. Heck yeah, I'd be motivated.
Greatness of the SLDF, never backing down from a challenge, taking betrayal and even nukes with a laugh, and always coming back for another dose of glorious justice. Through this, the Black Watch would have their vengeance done. The only thing left was to take Amaris down. Amaris had fled to his imperial palace deep in the secluded Canadian wilderness, guarded by a final garrison. The final operation was Kerensky, his right-hand man, General Aaron de Chevalier, and members of the 26th and 328th Royal BattleTech Divisions. The last...
I was concerned that Amaris somehow escaped into space and we wouldn't be able to track him down. But no, I feel like at this point the SLDF has everything locked down. We gotta get this guy. No matter the cost, we must see him brought to justice. That's the only way he can give closure to all these people who had been fighting for so long.
Last major battle of Amaris Civil War ended with Kerensky kicking in the front door of Amaris's palace with his Orion battle mech and demanding Amaris's surrender. And Amaris did. And with that, the war came to an end. Once Amaris had ordered his men to stand down, there were only a few thousand left. Earth was a near ruin, much of its population homeless or starving. Kerensky had tried to spare civilian populations the worst of it, but Amaris had not. All in some way bore the marks of the conflict. After capture initially, Kerensky was keen to treat Amaris and his family with respect due as they were still royalty, and laws applied regarding their treatment. Kerensky was, if anything, up to this point observant of the laws and regulations of his oaths. Kerensky made certain Amaris had everything a deposed noble should. His family was kept in surviving luxury accommodation while forces gathered to debate what should happen. That was until people discovered how this had all started. It is of note that the SLDF had no idea what happened to the Camerons beyond rumor. They had assumed Cameron was kept as a captive, and that would be used as leverage if Amaris ever needed a quick way out. A bargaining chip perhaps kept in a gilded cage. But that was not to be. 2 weeks after Amaris' surrender, the Imperial throne room was unsealed for the first time since the coup, since the massacre of House Cameron, and within the SLDF found the rotting carcasses of the entire Cameron family. The tomb of House Cameron shocked the SLDF. It gutted them. Kerensky had to see it for himself. Kerensky stood in the throne room for 30 minutes, examined how this had all started, drinking...
Dude. Oh, man. And he was the one in charge of taking care of him, too. And to see him like this is one of those moments where your life flashes before your eyes. All the decisions that had been made, and all the things that could have gone differently, if only you had done something else.
He had them all shot. Terra was in ruins. Star League was gutted. The hegemony, a series of cratered, scarred worlds with displaced populations. The SLDF were now all veteran soldiers without much in terms of guidance, cause, or even a home. Many of them had been wounded multiple times and found ways to continue on. Their victory now seemed, if anything, hollow misery. The fleet was a collection of scarred vessels held together by jury-rigged repairs, stolen parts, and ragged determination. Star League was now a distant idea, a memory that had sustained them up to this point through hell, through enormous loss time and again, and now nothing to show for it.
There is no way that things can go back to the way that they were. I didn't even think about it in the moment, but there were probably people who fought their way to Terra with the hope that the Cameron lineage would still be there, still be alive, and still be able to reinstate the SLDF to its former glory. But now reality is setting in. We're here, we've done the job, but it's over. Nothing will ever be the same.
The SLDF was down to at best a quarter of its pre-Civil War manpower. Its fighting men and women shells of the people they had once been, used, abused, and wounded by the horrors of war. Many of them factually now had no homes, or even if they could return, they were so scarred and twisted by the conflict they'd never fit in. The war had made them ghosts. In the very end, Kerensky had 113 divisions left, many of them severely under strength, missing critical components. Most of them were patchwork divisions made of survivors, volunteers, mercenaries, and replacements. The once proud SLDF was a mob of soldiers reduced to understrength units barely maintaining cohesion as a fighting force. And soon enough, things would get far worse. The great houses, seeing opportunity, began to act. They would occupy the remaining hegemony worlds for their own good,
of course,
and soon assembled to decide a new First Lord.
No good deed goes unpunished.
After the fall of Terra and the death of Stefan Amaris, the Council Lords of Star League made their first decision. They stripped Kerensky of his command responsibilities, the title of Protector and all that entailed. Soon after, they began to squabble for power as there was no rightful inheritor of First Lord. Each lord in turn would claim the title of First Lord for themselves and agreed that the council would be dissolved by the lords on 12th of August, 2781. And with that last act, Star League was dead. General Aaron de Chevalier, Kerensky's right-hand man, immediately proposed Kerensky overthrow the House Lords and restore the Inner Sphere without their petty bickering.
I like this guy. He's like, well, you know what? They can go screw themselves. And I get it. I feel you. To fight the good fight, to get all the way here and just to get screwed over by these people who didn't even lend a helping hand at the start. God, it must be so you just want to pull out your hair from how frustrating it is. But we're going to have to reach a point where Kerensky is just tired of all this, right? And then he just leaves. Just leaves to go into the periphery, far, far out into space, and start things anew.
General de Chevalier told Kerensky the SLDF was with him and was prepared to strike, to overthrow the unworthy House Lords and solve
this as well. The soldiers, the people, I don't think they're gonna listen to the houses. I think they're gonna listen to the person who liberated them, who led them through this war this entire time. And it's not like he was there in the command room giving orders. He was there on the battlefield in his mech fighting with them. The amount of respect that Kerensky commands is immeasurable.
Of the succession crisis with the might of the SLDF to bring an end to all of this madness once and for all, to lead them into a golden age, with worthy leadership steering humanity toward a bright and noble future. And Kerensky said no. Kerensky refused because he would not turn his guns on what he'd sworn to protect. In fact, Kerensky spent the next few years trying his hardest to reconvene the Great Lords, traveling extensively, trying to get refuge for the displaced millions, trying to desperately to rebuild the hegemony, trying to desperately restart Star League, its bureaucracy, its systems of governance.
Yes. You have to consider the people, too. They had been fighting this war for so long, and to start another one immediately, that would crush everybody. One of the goddamn houses had to be so selfish. But, I mean, from their perspective, obviously they would be. But still, though, man, still.
Kerensky visited the Lords to try to get them to come together, to agree on basic humanitarian principles, and above all, continue the Star League he had fought so hard for, its ideologies being something that sustained hope. And one by one, the great Lords of the Inner Sphere told him to fuck off.
Yeah.
All of this didn't faze former General Kerensky. He was now an old man who'd fought his whole life for something that they'd just signed away. He fought on, still for what he believed as what he saw as his duty to never give up. But soon, he became alarmed in discovering that the great houses were each preparing for war. to absorb the hegemony in totality,
Oh my God.
to split it up like spoils and then duke it out amongst themselves for supremacy. In doing so, they were intending to poach the remaining Star League Defense Force to bolster their now rapidly growing house armies. And that was the final straw for Kerensky. It was too much. When a few war-weary units began to defect to the growing house militaries, and with the portent of war growing daily, Kerensky made a plan.
Fuck this shit, I'm out.
And leave. Kerensky brought his idea to the sole surviving Star League bureaucrat. Jerome Blake was the head of SL Comnet, and desperately trying to fix the damaged HPG network, he was so respected for his impartial reputation and integrity that in 2780...
Oh no! Not the space wizard enthusiast! Oh, so this is where it begins. From this point forward, we can then blame every single problem on the phone company. Roger that.
He was offered the position of Minister of Communications of Star League, a nation that now didn't exist. He was the last vestige of the old regime, the last bureaucrat, the last Star League official. And it was something he really didn't even notice because he was trying to reinstate the first circuit of the HPG network at the time. His nomination was one of the last few things the Great Lords ever agreed on, other than stripping Kerensky of all power and going back to arguing over who was now First Lord. When Kerensky confessed his intentions, Blake was furious, but agreed to prevent anybody from ever finding out until Kerensky was gone, on a few conditions. Conditions that Kerensky agreed to. With secrecy assured, Kerensky assembled the remnants of the SLDF and addressed its officers in a warehouse, despite having been formally removed from his rank by the Lords of Star League. He told them that his intentions were to take the Star League Defense Force, its stockpiles of weapons and technology, and leave the Inner Sphere forever. He said that the spirit of the Star League was alive in all of those who had suffered with him, and that they could leave the coming storm to take the weapons and technology away from the people intent on destroying everything. He discussed even perhaps to return someday, to restore order and sanity, and perhaps hope. The majority of the assembled SLDF agreed to this plan with a standing ovation. A small percentage wanted to stay, thinking abandoning Terra and the hegemony was a betrayal of ideals. Kerensky created a poll and asked every member of the SLDF their choice, stay or go. Almost 80% sided with Kerensky, and unlike Amaris, this vote was legitimate, and so they planned to run.
Kerensky is a far different leader of a much different caliber. Even without this rank, with no fear involved, you just respect him and his choices and how resolute he is with his ideals. And I think any of the observant people within the army would know that things are just not going to be the same. So, no matter what, we can't change it back to how it was. Gotta start anew. And this seems to be the best way forward. With obviously that lingering hope that someday, far, far in the future, we'll be able to reunite again. To re-spark what was once the SLDF.
Run far away off the edge of the known map, to the deep periphery and beyond. To make this happen, the SLDF more or less stole everything they could. They looted and tore down supply yards across the hegemony regardless of what flag flew over them.
Take what you can, screw the houses.
Were conducted round the clock in the few reactivated SLDF fleet yards which had survived the war. Military bases were completely stripped. All remaining funds were used to buy supplies on any market. They would not be coming back this lifetime. On 8th of July, the SLDF issued a single word through the HPG network: Exodus. And at that moment, across 50 star systems, the SLDF mobilized one last time and jumped for a brave new future beyond the reaches of the Inner Sphere. Their descendants would later return nearly 265 years later, but that's a story for another time. With them went the last vestiges of Starleague. Some of the bravest men and women of the Inner Sphere. Some of the bravest men and women the Inner Sphere would ever know took part in one last heroic act to save what they believed in by taking their skill set and weapons out of the hands of those who'd used them senselessly. Soon enough, the Inner Sphere would descend into total war over the notion of succession over the position of First Lord.
We can kind of figure out how this goes. And I know it's not directly linked, but I'd like to think that this is why the Clanners are sort of built different. Being the descendants of these people who had fought such a good fight for such a long time against such insurmountable odds, and somehow came out the victor, only to have complete victories stolen from them by some greedy bastards. I can even understand their disdain for the Inner Sphere and the houses that had kicked them out, essentially. But this creates such an interesting dynamic when it comes to any conflict between the Inner Sphere and the clans now. Because, on the one hand, I think the Inner Sphere it's not good, but it's okay. Like, people are surviving, and at this point in time, it's not like anybody involved in what had happened with the Starleague Defense Force would still be alive, right? Could you even call it like a generational hatred that has persisted over the years? Or is it more of like a generational goal that this is always what the Clanners wanted, to come back and set up the Starleague Defense Force, but the houses are still there, and obviously they would oppose them. But then, on the other hand, there doesn't really seem to be any other way to convince them.
The succession wars would rage for 200 years without decisive outcome. Rather than slam the door shut on all this, I'll tie up a few loose threads, as I'll know you'll want to know. Maybe not all of these threads, because I'd like to leave room for future talks, so let's get down to it. Jerome Blake agreed to conceal Kerensky's movement and departure in exchange for assistance. Kerensky convinced staying elements of the SLDF to protect the first circuit of SL Comnet, to preserve just a notion of Starleague and the hegemony from the coming storm. A bastion of the old guard, making sure at least the basics of Starleague survived. Blake took it upon himself to preserve as much technological knowledge as possible with the total collapse of Starleague, and to further that he knew he had to maintain control of the interstellar communications network he'd spent.
And that's why the phone company captures all the really good tech. Make sure nobody gets it. This is just so incredible how everything is finally tying into each other. Like, I had learned bits and pieces here and there about the current state of things, and now going back here to learn how it all happened, it's such an indescribable feeling, and I think the closest thing I can get to it is just satisfaction. I feel incredibly satisfied to see all of this play out and see all the dots connect. And that's why I love learning about video game lore, or I guess in this case, sort of like video game adjacent lore. But it just gives you a rush. Oh, maybe it's just me. But it's so cool. Nothing else really provides this sort of feeling. Storytelling is just such a beautiful art.
His life building. By 2785, the Starleague Department of Communications was renamed to Comstar. Blake managed to gain the support of the House Lords with the communications protocols of 2787 and soon declared Terra off limits, promising neutrality in communication services to all so long as that neutrality was observed in turn. The SLDF units who stayed to protect his mission became the Com Guards. And Blake's doings over time would become legend. After Amaris's death, Kerensky didn't simply want to dump Amaris's body, for he feared supporters of the madman might be convinced that he never died and was waiting to return.
They'll still be around there somewhere.
He also didn't want him buried, so as to prevent the gravesite from being a shrine to the fucker. So Kerensky
Fair
dropped
enough.
Amaris's fat corpse off at the New Samarkand Medical School to be publicly part of their display and studies for generations, so medical students could see what a fat idiot looked like. That is until the secession wars caused such a loss of technology that the stasis system stopped working, and they just dumped his body somewhere. For all we know, Amaris's corpse is in a dumpster behind Golden Corral.
Of course, it came back to this.
The sole surviving piece of the glorious Black Watch. A battle-scarred, irradiated mech hand actuator.
Wait, yeah, that's right. Where did the Black Watch go? Did they come with us? Or are they still out there somewhere? Did they go on their own?
Was recovered and displayed by the mercenary unit, the North Wind Highlanders, who would preserve and venerate it for generations to come.
As you should.
They would tell the story of the Black Watch, of their bravery and madness and glory. They would keep the traditions of kilts, whiskey, and murder alive for centuries on. When the Inner Sphere needed a new Black Watch, the North Wind Highlanders formed one, remembering the lessons of the old and upholding them as best they were able. The 3rd Star League Regimental Combat.
So are you telling me that the old Black Watch are gone now? Either retired or dead? I think I'm just gonna assume that they left as well.
Combat team decided to stay in the Inner Sphere. They loved the Rosselhog district more than the unknown. When Kerensky left, they lowered the Star League flag and put it away. They also lowered their regimental flag, the Eridani Light Horse, to half-mast in solemn observation. Ever since, at every headquarters they have ever had, they have kept a bare flagpole for the return of Star League. They served honorably as elite mercenaries for generations afterward. They would also eventually form the point of the spear in conquering Huntress and driving Clan Smoke Jaguar to extinction in Operation Bulldog. The 81st Star League Mechanized Infantry Division became the infamous 4th Tau Ceti Rangers, surviving as celebrated mercenaries for centuries, applying their hard-won combat skills for coin and cleavage.
Oh, wait. I just noticed. Tau Ceti? Oh my god, it's all linked to Marathon! Apparently not. I did not know this, but Tau Ceti is just a real star out there, and very popularly used in most sci-fi. But you know, I gotta do the Marathon reference. It's tradition by now at this point on the channel. I'm either mentioning Marathon or I'm mentioning Gurren Lagann.
The 151st Royal Battle Mech Regiment stayed to form the backbone of the Comm Guards and would give them discipline, training, and the military credence to protect the order until they were needed centuries later. The Black Watch commander Hanni Schmidt's daughter, Colleen Schmidt, survived the war after fighting Amaris as a resistance fighter from her base in the Cascade Mountains. She later joined Kerensky in the Exodus.
Okay.
In
There you go.
time, she would eventually become the first Khan of Clan Blood Spirit and found the Schmidt blood heritage, spawning several future Khans and living on today as an honored blood name in clan society. Major Elizabeth Hazen of Black Watch fame survived the coup, the nukes, the occupation, and fought Amaris until he died as a guerrilla fighter throughout the long occupation of Terra. She earned with distinction the Star League Medal of Honor. She was, in fact, the very last person ever awarded that medal before Star League collapsed. Rather than stay in the military, she tendered her resignation and recuperated in a remote monastery. She also took up falconry as a hobby.
A well-deserved
When
rest.
Kerensky committed to the Exodus, she enlisted and rejoined the SLDF.
Oh,
In
never
Exodus,
mind.
she would become one of the 4 founders of Clan Jade Falcon.
There you go,
Philip
okay.
Drummond, a member of Amaris's own 832nd Amaris Dragoons, had defected to Kerensky during the Rimworld's Republic campaign, rather than serve the usurper any longer. He joined the SLDF, keeping his commission, and joined the general in the Exodus. In time, he would become the first Khan of Clan Novacat, and of note, the only Khan who was at one point Amaris's man.
Cool beans.
Franklin Osis, a tank commander in the SLDF 238th Armored Division, would join the Exodus to become a farmer. Completely tired of conflict, circumstances would change him drastically, and after a span of time, he became first Khan of Clan Smoke Jaguar. And some I know will ask, so let's get to it.
Look, okay. I'm like, okay, everybody retired and they're living a peaceful life. No. Now we're back in leadership roles, back in the fight. I guess you can just never take that out of a person, you know? It's in their blood. It's in their nature now. These people are just natural-born leaders for very good reason.
What about the Periphery? Well, for a time it turned into a total shithole. You see, the Periphery was utterly smashed by its own reckless campaign of hippity-hoppity, get-off-my-property, I have nuclear weapons style of warfighting. And then it emboldened terrorist groups to fight the SLDF, terrorist groups they funded and equipped. Terrorist groups that then refused to listen to the government once the SLDF left. After all, those people felt like they were entitled to a piece of the action. Also, while the SLDF had conquered them in an age of reunification, it had also rebuilt them. No more Star League meant no more reconstruction, and many places more or less collapsed. The Rimworld Republic fell apart or was annexed, or one and then the other alternatively. New powers in time rose, but never to the extent of the old Periphery's strength. And for a time, the SLDF itself faded into legend, falling into the memory of distant past. And deep beyond the Periphery, General Kerensky made one last broadcast. It was sent via radio and would have only reached the Inner Sphere 1,000 years later. Interestingly enough, the Inner Sphere would not have to wait 1,000 years to hear the final words of Kerensky. It was intercepted by Task Force Serpent on their way to destroy Clan Smoke Jaguar. It was not a bitter message after all he'd been through, but Kerensky's last words toward the Inner Sphere were a message of hope.
To all citizens of the Inner Sphere, do I, Alexander Kerensky, send greetings.
Know that I have taken the remnant of the Star League Defense Force, which has remained true to its purpose, beyond the boundaries of the Inner Sphere, beyond the Periphery. I have done this, neither out of disappointment with those whom we leave behind, nor out of spite or disdain, as some will say. No. We have left the Inner Sphere because we love it too much to see it destroyed. In the wake of the usurper's coup, and the long, bitter fighting that came with it, I fear that my forces would do incalculable, possibly irreparable harm to our society. We are sworn to ward the Star League and its subjects, not destroy it. Thus, we have left the only homes we have ever known to place the destructive capability of this armada beyond the reach of those who would use it, not for defense, but for conquest. Perhaps, with the might of our mechs and ships out of reach, the leaders who now grapple with one another will relinquish their dreams of subjugating their neighbors and learn to live in peace with them. Perhaps, one day, should mankind step back from the brink of the abyss, we, our children, or our children's children, will return to once more serve and protect and guide the Star League in mankind's quest for the stars.
Farewell.
God damn it, man. Why is Kerensky such a legend? Like, even if, you know, you're part of the Inner Sphere, you're part of the houses, you hate the clanners, I think everybody can respect Kerensky to a certain degree. Even after all that he's been through, he still believes that mankind can be better. than to search out for your own selfish gains, to take a step back and realize that we can do better. I can't be that hopeful, but Kerensky can, despite all the horrors that he's seen. Small part of me feels ashamed of myself. But I genuinely don't think the Inner Sphere can ever get their shit together. The houses aren't going to unite. The way things are is that's just how it's gonna be. And it's probably going to get worse. However, people need hope. We need more people like Kerensky out there, fighting the good fight, despite all the shit that they have to go through.
And on that note, I think I'll wrap this up. Warriors, and teach a new generation the joy of what we have. I think we'll be able to make the world a little bit better if we try. Or just wreck them on tabletop and say, welcome aboard, fucko. Anyways.
Attention, free birth scum. I am the Khan of Smoke Jaguar. You have made a mockery of our ways through the use of your weapon known as humor for far too long.
Genetically
Sure,
engineered
bud.
losers who don't understand good jokes say, what?
What?
Well, while he's thinking about that, class dismissed. Those mercs we hired ought to tie him up. All right, boys and girls, to the dropship.
You cannot flee my wrath. I will leave you. And he's
We're out of
leaving.
here.
This is ridiculous. He promised he would stay this time.
Sayonara, you motherfuckers! Later, nerd. Oh. Now I'm sad that it's over. It was so good.
You dare to refuse my bajol?
Hey folks, welcome to Uncle Bucky's Urban Mech Emporium, your one-stop shop for urban mechs and urban mech parts. Located on Van Zant, 2 miles west of the spaceport by the Golden Corral. Pull
Of
up,
course
get
it is.
yourself a mile of grits, and then waddle on over to Uncle Bucky's Urban Mech Emporium, home of the all-you-can-drink water fountain, free balloons for kids, and sick deals. I'm Uncle Bucky,
Ew.
and let me tell you, I got an urban mech for everybody. Need your lawn mowed? Urban Mech. Cousin's wedding? Urban Mech. Keeping the damn Inner Sphere from taking your freedoms?
Am I being detained?
Urban Mech. Urban Mechs are the finest mech C-Bells can buy. We take H-Bills
You sure
too.
about that?
We take gold, we take germanium, we take fancy and fancy space rocks and stock in most companies. Heck, we'll even trade you an Urban Mech for an Urban Mech. We got Urban Mech accessories. We got Urban Mech cup holders,
Yeah.
Urban Mech speedometers that go from slow to less slow. We got Urban Mech massaging footrests, rear view mirrors, and even them fuzzy dangly dice. Heck, we got bitchin' paint jobs with flames, sick-ass metal wizards fighting dragons and shit. We got stars and bars, we got no step-on snack flags. Heck, we got all sorts of decals, paint jobs, stickers, and whatnot. Customize the heck out of your Urban Mech at minimal cost. We got fast Urban Mechs, slow Urban Mechs with autocannons, Urban Mechs without autocannons, one that's like 47 machine guns or something. We got one with jump jets, we got one that only has one jump jet that spins a little. We got
Why?
an Urban Mech with and without bees. We got Urban Mechs with
I prefer
spiky
without.
bits, sharp bits, angry bits. Heck, we even got one with a nuke.
Hey, check out this sick ass
Hell
nuke.
yeah.
Hey, my
Best
name's Doug
Urban
Wood,
Mech.
and I'm here to tell you about the Periphery's greatest auto mall of bargains. Come on down to Star League Auto. That's right, we got cars dating all the way back to Star League. Who gives a shit if they're 250 or whatever years old? That's some prime age vintage auto for any
Refurbished.
auto enthusiast. Look at this here Bullane Military Products Rotunda. At a sleek 20 tons, it's the perfect car for any occasion. Powered by a fusion engine, you got nukes under the hood for a quick getaway.
That-
Did I mention that it's got a fucking
Won't
large
go
laser
wrong.
and SRM2? Yeah, you can pass anybody because if not, they're dead. They're dead. It's great. And nobody's gonna tow your car because it weighs 20 tons. Find me a city parking attendant that's gonna tow a nuclear engineered 20-ton car. Also, as a bonus, it's got 4 doors for more whores. Located on Van Zandt, 2 miles down from the old spaceport
go.
across from Uncle Bucky's. And it's not a goddamn nuke.
I think one of the cars blew up.
Sir, we have no idea where they came from. Needless to say, the situation is critical.
Give it to me straight. Can we spin up enough forces to provide the necessary defense?
Hallo, Entschuldigung, ist das der primäre Kontrollbunker für die planetäre Verteidigung?
No.
Hey Hey boys and girls, it's me, Mackie the Comstar Clown, and I've got a message from Comstar! We regret to inform you this is the end of your broadcast day.
Oh no. You gotta pay up.
Resistance is expensive. Pay your bills, fucko.
Yup.
I wanted to tell you our new You Have No Choice because there's literally no alternative service plans. Firstly, we want you to know you have no choice in service providers.
Monopolies
so
are great, aren't
for
they?
Choosing us. Well, and with our secure protocols, nothing is secret, boys and girls. By that I mean we read everything. You're welcome. Now, keep in mind, if
that
you
laugh?
without ever complaining, remember, we literally own the money and regulate all the mercenaries in the banks within 150 light years of this broadcast. Good luck, buddy! You might be saying we're a shadowy cabal or a techno-religion, and that's really none of your goddamn business! Can't pay your bill? No problem. We're also the bank, so we'll just garnish your wages or kill you and acquire
Everything.
your estate.
Yeah.
No need to worry. Our meticulous record keeping will ensure that any lingering debt you have will be passed on to your children in perpetuity. Thinking about destroying or damaging our property? Well, go ahead, bucko, and you'll find out what 50 cal feels like on your skin. You may ask yourself, how do I know my message will get to its destination? And we're here to tell you, shut the fuck up and cough up the money. Comstar's the trusted name and sole provider for the major houses, Silly Karinsky and his SLDF, the Rural Republics and that fat con guy, and all the major mercenary outfits. They literally have no other choice. But don't take my word for it.
Security isn't a concern because you're giving your data to the people doing the spying. By reading this piece of paper, you are consenting to monitoring. Oh man, they got me again.
They told me if I read this and said they were not a cult or something, I'd get briefcases of big faces.
I love Comstar. They never threatened my family exactly 6 times last year.
It only took 6 years for my message to arrive, and when I complained, they only broke my feet. I think that's fair because I got a partial refund. It was a coupon for, like, 2 corn dogs. I saw
Hell yeah.
shit
Worth.
while I was out.
They told me they knew I was up to something and they put me in space jail.
Comstar! When you think we're watching,
The greatest company ever. We all love Comstar. Karinsky Blues?
Two old friends, never seen again.
Ah, this song.
2, 3, 4. Left Niagara Ring in 27, 23. Climbed up all the ranks with everybody following me. I made the Atlas mech and saw the first Lord die. I have the blues, the Alex Kerensky blues. I was fighting rebels when I heard Amaris call. He said, fuck all the Camerons, this is my Star League after all. He tried to win me over, but I blew up his own worlds. I have the blues, the Alex Kerensky blues. Rimworld's gone, now it's Operation Chieftain time. We split up our whole fucking army to keep those houses in line. Invaded Holy Terror and 100 million of us died. I have the blues, the Alex Kerensky blues. Went to the palace and I kicked down that door. I said, alright Amaris, time to end your civil war. But I found the Camerons dead, so I cut Amaris into shreds. I have the blues, the Alex Kerensky blues. Star League ruined with no real air in sight. All the great houses gear up for another huge fucking fight. Some
of course they
people wanted
do.
me in charge, but I had to say hell no, 'cause of the blues, the Alex Kerensky blues. So I gathered up my army and I said, hey boys, we can't let those red houses have our nice destructive toys. I left the fifth with Blake and took the rest out of the sphere. I have the blues, the Alex Kerensky blues. Pentagon Worlds ain't so bad, but not all my guys agree. Had to kill a few of them, send that voice of Kerensky. Made a Star League in exile, but it was doomed from the start. I had the blues, the Alex Kerensky blues. So I died and left all I had in the hands of my son. And what did he do? He made the Klan, stupid son of a gun.
God damn it.
All they want to do was go and burn my precious in his sphere. I have the blues, the Alex Kerensky blues.
So that's what happened. Things did not go as planned.
The trek to a new horizon is a long thing. A trek to the stars. A Star Trek. To boldly go where no man has gone before. Or something like that.
Yeah.
These are the fucking credits. Hello, everybody. This is Duncan Fisher. Brought to you by Sidecorn. Sidecorn. It's got 1,000% of your daily value of goob. What the fuck is goob?
Yeah,
Who
that's
wrote
what I was
this?
gonna ask.
I'm goddamn Duncan Fisher. Tex hired me to read some of these. Let's see. Patreon. Yes, Patreon, where your dreams go to die. This is where you spend your fucking money paying this goddamn misanthrope to do God knows what. Why are you paying for this? This isn't even credits. It's a phone book. Who are all these people?
I would like to inform my patrons as well that yes, you are paying me for whatever the heck I'm going to do. Who knows? I don't know what series I'll be checking out next, that's for sure.
Fuck it. I'm not reading this. I'd rather suck up to Comstar. At least they pay me
Really?
on time.
I guess that's fair. Surprising that they pay you on time.
Okay, fine. I'm back. Contracts be damned. Okay, I'll read this, but I won't be happy. Black Pants Legion, good.
Very insightful, thank you.
So, if I'm reading this right, Catch-22 ate a whole bowl of Fiesta Pale. Jesus, fuck, how do you even do that? It's not even remotely food.
I don't even know what that is.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just saying this for the record. I'm not wearing pants, black or otherwise. No, this mech announcer flies free. God bless Solaris, and God bless mech pilots everywhere.
Good to know. Extremely important information.
Why does Amaris always go to the Golden Corral? This restaurant is not great. They won't even let you put crab legs in the chocolate fountain. This is truly upsetting.
Oh God. There was a moment in time where I went to a Golden Corral, and let's just say that there were some people who were having a little too much fun at the buffet. They basically did that, and yeah. Suffice to say, we walked out of the restaurant.
Hi, everybody. I'm George Ledoux, and I love all of you very much. At least that's what this script says. From Neverwinter Nights to Freedom Force to Dying Light to BattleTech, it has been my privilege and honor to voice your favorites, to act, and to play a part in all of your fun over the years. If you need a voice, hit me up. Oh, and Tex thinks I'm not an asshole, if that means anything.
yeah, it's odd when it doesn't work. Like, what's the point of it if you're just not gonna send any notifications for any arbitrary reason?
Located on Van Zant, 2 miles west of the spaceport down by the Colden Kerfucking.
First off, apologies if any part of this video was weirdly edited. In those scenarios, it's likely I had to do a jump cut in order to remove some piece of copyrighted music. But what can I say about Texas coverage of the Amaris Civil War apart from magnificent? I genuinely wish for BattleTech to get some sort of media adaptation. A series, a movie, with really high quality, lots of budget put into it, because I genuinely think it will work. It has all the ingredients to be incredibly popular, with a lot of political intrigue that I really enjoy. The series takes into consideration so many things that other series in a similar setting don't really think about, and we're able to intertwine all of it into a believable story with really intriguing characters who you can't help but root for, or obviously hate. It's an emotional roller coaster that I really wish more people could experience. I'm just really glad that I'm here now. Finally finished this video, and now I know what you guys love about it so much and why so many people have requested I check this one out. But yeah, I think that's going to be it from me. As always, make sure to go support Tex. Link to that is at the very top of the description. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.